I have a few stories that I can't explain, but this is the one that I feel I need to share because it happens to align with a type of experience that so many people have reported throughout the years, arguably since ancient times. I'd always been certain of what I saw, but when I first became aware of shadow people as a commonly reported phenomena, any doubt that I had about the incident disappeared. So many people have tried to tell me that what I experienced was just a dream or simply brushed it off with that look that says this guy is either nuts or lying. And honestly, it's time that people start taking victims of paranormal visitation at their word. In an age where we're starting to wake up to the fact that victims of all forms of abuse deserve a voice and representation, it's sad to see that so many people are disregarded as mentally ill or confused just because their experience lacks an accredited scientific explanation. My experience was not as extreme as some that I've heard from others on various paranormal forums and podcasts, but it has affected my life in a number of ways, and to have the source of so many anxieties and frustration in your life disregarded as a dream or a fiction leaves a person feeling very alone, unable to really explore their trauma, because the subject is so taboo and very few people are willing to take your account seriously and help you search for answers. This is my story. And I assure you, I have nothing to gain by bringing you a false account. I just want to put my testimony out there so that other experiencers can know that they are not alone and that they are, probably at least, not crazy. There are things in this life that do not yet have a scientific explanation, and humanity is not the only sentient intelligence that operates in this world. Beyond that, I really don't know a damn thing. But accepting the fact is the first step in beginning to fully understand the nature of this world, or any others that may exist. The first time I saw it, I was about 8, maybe as old as 10. I was living in a dingy little house in Clear Lake, Iowa, in what you would consider to be the trashier part of a small tourist town. My room was at the end of a long hallway, on the right side of the hall if you were looking toward it from the kitchen on the opposite end. Across the hall, the left side, was my toddler sister's room, and in the middle of the hall on the left was the door to my parents' room. One morning I got out of bed and started to move toward the kitchen. When I was just about at my parents' door, looking toward the kitchen, the figure appeared. It sort of leaned into the hall from the living room, which was adjacent to the kitchen. It was a tall, black figure. Black as in pitch black, but sort of smoky and hazy, like it was just a bunch of compressed black smoke molded into a human form. Everyone seemed tall to me as a kid, but this thing certainly seemed taller than my parents, who were about 5'5" and 5'6" respectively. The only distinguishable feature on the being were that it had 2 glowing red eyes, just like circular LEDs, on its face. They didn't really seem to be the size and shape that a human eye really is, but truly round and glowing very brightly. This detail I'm sort of fuzzy on, but that's what I recall. From the moment it leaned into view, the thing was just watching me, and when I saw it, I stopped and watched it back. I wasn't exactly scared, but had the distinct impression that this was all it was there to do, to watch. I knew that this wasn't something that I should be seeing in the real world, and I was uncomfortable, but all in all, the thing was non-threatening and didn't make any advancements on me. It just stood there for a minute or two, and then leaned back out into the living room. I didn't follow it to see if it had disappeared. I just went back to my room until my parents woke up. I never, quote-unquote, woke up from this experience. My day progressed seamlessly into a normal day. I knew that this was not a dream because I was very familiar with my dreams. I had constant night terrors in this house, but I'll get into that later on. The point being, the kinds of dreams that I had were more distinctly bizarre and surreal than this experience, and I always woke up with an understanding that what I had experienced that night was just a dream. This was not the case that morning. If I was dreaming that morning, then I'm still dreaming, because like I said, I never woke up from it. The second experience was just as brief, but a bit more menacing. I can't say how much time passed between the two events, but this incident was dead in the middle of the day, full daylight with other people in the house going about their daily business. My mother was in the living room, and I had just walked into the kitchen and toward the hall. I was now standing approximately where the figure had been on the first occasion, looking down toward my room and my sister's. Suddenly, the figure appeared. This is where it gets really bizarre, because the thing actually crept out of my room. I mean, this effing thing was literally creeping, like some old school Scooby-Doo villain walking on tiptoes with its arms raised and hands bent toward the floor. If you get what I'm illustrating here, you should probably laugh, because it was just as goofy as it sounds. It crept from my room into my sister's room, which is what really freaked me out by this event. The whole thing was over in just a few seconds. Moving in this bizarre manner, it had its head turned toward me the entire time. From the moment that it crossed the threshold of my door, its eyes were already on me, as if to say, yeah, I'm here, straight creeping around your house, and there's nothing you can do about it. No one's gonna believe you. I had already told my mom about the first sighting, and of course she had dismissed it as a dream or my overactive imagination. So I didn't bring it up, but I was really scared that it had some sinister intentions with my sister. I do remember her having some nightmares around this time, which I heard from my room, her crying to my mom about how the quote-unquote creature from the Black Lagoon was standing in the corner of her room. I asked her about this years later, but she doesn't remember any details on that. So that's it. That's all I saw of this shadow person. But there's another element to my life at this house that I feel might be relevant to what I experienced. As I mentioned earlier, I was prone to night terrors while living in this house. Vivid but bizarre nightmares that almost always had something to do with being chased by various demons, monsters, etc. One recurring type of dream I had went like this. I'd be laying in my bed, everything seeming to be completely normal in my room, as it was in waking life, but I would get this feeling. It was this instinctual understanding that something horrible was about to come through my door. I would start to panic, but would be unable to move my body, so rather than use my arms and legs to physically leave my bed, I would, through a sheer force of will, hover off of my bed and float to the corner of the ceiling, as out of reach as possible. Nothing else was really different about my room and these experiences except for that dread. The dread that something was trying to get in. Another night I had a similar dream, where I woke up in my familiar room to find a tall, hairy man standing above me, reaching for me. I had the strong sense that this skinny, ape-like man was there to take me, and I recall doing my best to resist him, but the ending to that dream is fuzzy. That scares me to this day, more than the shadow person encounters, because the hairy men are a pretty common occurrence in high strangeness research, so I can't help but worry that there was some reality to that experience. I bring these dreams up because it seems that vivid nightmares in certain locations, this happened only in that house, that also have reported paranormal activity, indicates a relationship between the two. If you subscribe to the idea that these beings feed off of fear, then it seems plausible that the two are connected. This began in January of this year. I live on the front range of Colorado, meaning that once the mountains stop, it's basically plains for miles and miles. There are a lot of small roads and strange dead ends around these parts, and one of these is a favorite of me and my friends as it goes a long way out from the main road with basically no reason for anyone else to be there. This privacy is great for any variety of teenage shenanigans. Back in January, I was high as hell in the back of my friend's car as we drove down that road, hoping to park at the end so that we could smoke some more. As I was staring out the window, I swore that I could see the silhouette of a tall, strangely proportioned person running alongside our car. It was far out in the field, and I convinced myself that it was just my inebriated mind playing tricks on me so that I wouldn't freak out. And I didn't tell my friends so that it wouldn't bother them. We parked there for a few hours, lights off, and then went home with nothing else amiss. This actually makes me want to die now. Tonight I was headed back out to that spot with my girlfriend, both of us in separate cars. My drive up was pretty uneventful, but there was some fog that made it pretty spooky. Once we parked, my girlfriend hopped into my car and was obviously super freaked out. Once I got her to calm down, she told me what had happened. On the drive up, she looked out her window and saw a tall, dark figure, exactly like what I had seen 11 months ago, but this time, it was just standing there, staring. As soon as she made eye contact with it, her car radio turned to static. She pretty quickly turned it off and hauled ass to meet up with me. I cannot stress enough how little she believes in the supernatural, so seeing her as freaked out as she was definitely left me a little uneasy. I helped calm her down, and then hopped out of the car to take a piss. I know, literally the stupidest move ever, but at the time I hadn't remembered what had happened to me previously, and I really had to pee. While I was out there, I definitely felt like something was watching me, but I'm a generally anxious person, so I brushed it off, as I was only going to be out there for like 30 seconds. When I stood up and went back to my door, my girlfriend looked absolutely terrified, and she was staring over my shoulder, not at me. My first thought wasn't anything supernatural. We're both girls, so I assumed that some creepy rapist had crawled out of the grass and was standing right behind me, waiting to hurt us. When I tell you I flew into the driver's seat, I really mean it. My flight reflex took 100% over. I slammed the door, looked over at her, and yelled, "What?" As far as I could tell, there wasn't anyone there. She told me that she had heard faint, female voices coming from the grass, exactly like ours. We were in an open plain, so there was no way that it was an echo. Whatever was out there was mimicking us. The mimicry is what did it for me, and I knew that we had to leave ASAP, especially as I had deciphered my hazy memories of the last time that I saw whatever it was. I didn't tell my girlfriend exactly what was wrong, just turned around so that my headlights were on her car so that she could get out there quickly. Once we were safely away, I called her and told her my thoughts. We're both incredibly spooked right now, obviously. So be patient with me. This is super hard to explain, but I'll do my best as I really think something weird happened to us in this haunted city. Back when we could go outside without fear, my friends and I went to Savannah, Georgia for my bachelorette weekend. For anyone who isn't familiar with downtown Savannah, there's a large intersection in front of these extremely old historical steps that lead to the river walk where the river is and a bunch of stores. While waiting at the intersection for our turn to walk across the street so we could get to the historic steps, all of a sudden everything went really quiet, and time literally seemed to stand still. We turned to look at each other, all noticing the weird feeling of stillness, and slowly started to walk across the intersection, nervously giggling to ourselves as we pointed out that even though the lights still hadn't turned for us to walk, all the cars that would usually be still driving by were stopped dead in the middle of the road, way before you would normally stop at an intersection, with one car literally in the process of turning, yet idling completely still in the middle of that intersection, stopping for no reason whatsoever, with the driver appearing to be frozen. At this point, we were noticing we didn't hear any birds anymore, or sounds at all for that matter, except for the crosswalk timer saying to wait over and over, as if someone was hitting the button repeatedly, yet we were the only ones around. Completely freaked the F out, we hurriedly crossed the street, all expressing, kinda loudly as we were freaking out, about why everything and everyone seemed frozen in time. Once we made it to the other side of the road, Just as quickly as the stillness began, the wind started to blow and the birds started to fly. Cars started moving again, and people that were definitely not around us before were suddenly there. We all looked at each other and around us, and I swear people probably thought we were all on drugs. I felt like Harry, Ron, and Hermione when they jumped to the regular world in the last Harry Potter, all of a sudden there, when they weren't before. And to this day, we all have absolutely no idea what happened. We felt like we went through some sort of time glitch or something, or a portal of some sort, if that's the right word. But we definitely experienced something in the middle of that road. We later asked our Uber that night if it had happened to them before, to which he replied that we needed to give him whatever drugs we were on. If this has happened to anyone else, please let me know. Also, I might add that we were completely sober, as it was mid-morning and we were on the way to breakfast on the Riverwalk, and definitely not on any drugs. This is my sister's story. It happened when she must have been about 16. She's 22 this year. We live in Queensland, Australia, and this happened at my grandmother's house. Her land is quite big. There's about 7 acres for the area, considering that this happened right in the middle of a very well-populated suburb. Her house is right next to the school that my sister went to, like jump the fence next to. There are 3 houses on my grandma's street. I put street in quotations because it's basically just one giant driveway that my grandma lives at the end of. The neighbor's backyard is visible through some light trees at my grandma's front yard. The reason I explain this is because from reading a lot of Skinwalker stories, this doesn't seem like the typical setting. It must have been about 8 p.m. during winter in Australia, so it was pretty dark. She was dog-sitting my grandma's 2 very little dogs, Ruby and Crystal, for the weekend. She let them out to go to the toilet and kept an eye on them because they get distracted pretty easily. She called the dogs, and only Crystal came running to the door. There's a dim light that illuminates the porch, but not her yard. She could barely see Ruby, but she was just sitting there, staring at her. She called her name a few more times in a high-pitched voice, which the dogs always come running to. Ruby took a few steps forward and just sat down again, still staring at my sister. My sister always emphasizes that Ruby looked all types of wrong. Her face appeared as if someone had tried to draw Ruby from memory, but just couldn't. She explains that it looked like a human crawling, but as if they were a dog. My sister was super freaked out. She noticed that she couldn't see or hear Ruby anywhere. She closed the door and ran into the room where both of the dogs had been sitting and where she was watching TV. And there they were, sitting on their bed, acting completely normal. She ran back to the door, and the thing pretending to be Ruby was gone. She locked the door and went straight to bed. It wasn't until recently that she brought up this story again. She had told it many times before, but considering I was about 8 the first time that she had told this story, I wasn't paying much attention to it. I recognized it as a skinwalker since I loved the episode of the Jenna and Julian podcast where they talk about them. I went to my sister and told her that that was what it was. My sister and I, being the paranormal addicts that we are, spent hours telling our sister and dad about skinwalkers. To this day, I'm still terrified that we have skinwalkers in Australia. I used to work as a cleaner when I was 16 in between colleges. This is the UK, so I had already left school. The place where I worked was a popular clothing store near my house and was built over ancient farmland. There were also rumors of druid burial grounds nearby, but that's another story. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal from a very young age, but this was by far the most haunted place I've ever worked, and my first apparition sighting. We were a team of 4 to 5 people, and all of us were assigned to different parts of the store. One of the sections was the women's fitting rooms. We would vacuum the rugs and cubicles, polish the mirrors, and all of that. You would hear high heels on the tiles the whole time that you were down there, and the sounds of rustling paper, coat hangers rattling, that kind of thing. There was also a general feeling of discomfort and unease, as though you were being followed and watched. This is hours before the store opened, so of course there were no customers. Sometimes a manager would be there, but they stayed upstairs in the office. The next part was the men's clothing area, which was on the 2nd floor. When you cleaned there, you were alone but for the occasional manager walking through. One time I was on the floor cleaning the railings by the cash registers, and a huge black shadow swept over me. I was surprised because I hadn't heard anybody approach, and as I looked around, I was definitely alone. My cleaning routine was to sweep the floor and collect the dirt into little piles around the pillars, then sweep it up all in one go at the end. The dirt piles moved constantly. I would go back to do the final big sweep, and some of the piles always would have disappeared. After I clocked out, the piles would be there again. I had a sense that the spirit was a young male farmhand who was very mischievous. I said as much to my coworker, and she told me that she refuses to clean in that area after polishing the mirrors one day and seeing the disembodied head of a young man peering over her shoulder. Aside from my instances with the piles, I would always hear the sound of coat hangers rattling and shuffling noises, but I never felt threatened by it. I used to laugh it off or just tell the spirit to stop, and he would most of the time. Now, after the store was clean, we would clean the staff quarters. Toilets and canteen, meeting rooms. The toilets were a non-paranormal horror in themselves. Note, I worked here with my mother. We were assigned to clean the female toilets, and usually if someone was using them, we would leave and give them privacy until they finished. So we went in, the middle stall was closed, and we heard rustling paper and heavy breathing. So we left and waited. And waited. And waited. The cleaning cupboard was right next to the toilets, and didn't even have a door. We would have seen and heard anybody who might have left. To leave and enter the toilets, you would have to walk straight past the open doorway and then walk down the corridor that directly faced it. It was an L-shaped corridor, with the toilets on the far end and the cleaning cupboard on the corner. Except when we went in after waiting 10 to 15 minutes, the middle stall door was wide open and empty. Now, on to the apparition. The children's clothing area was generally less creepy. There were coat hangers moving again. Sometimes things would fall off the shelves and rails, but we always just shrugged it off. The elevator was directly opposite the children's clothing, and we usually loaded our cleaning equipment into the elevator because it was too heavy to carry up the stairs. I remember rinsing my mop out, and I glanced up. There was a little boy around 6 or 7 years old, standing directly in front of me. He wore a flat cap, a pale shirt with suspenders, dark shorts, and socks up to his knees. At first I thought it was a mannequin, and when I blinked, he was gone. I thought I was just tired, and I shook my head. I spoke to my mother about it later, as she's Wiccan and super into the supernatural, and I described the boy to her. She had seen the exact same child a few weeks before, but only the back of him, as if he had been walking around a corner. She told me that she had the feeling he had died of lung-related issues, perhaps tuberculosis or pneumonia. So there you have it. Some of it can be explained by tiredness, I know, but I just thought I would share this experience. This happened around 2006 or 7. There is this guy. I'll call him Dean here, who's widely known in my small village. Dean was a drug addict, but managed somehow to work and build a family. But his addiction got worse, and eventually I got the news that he died in a mixed drugs overdose. We, friends and my then boyfriend, talked on a few different occasions about his death, how it was somehow foreseeable that he would die, and so on. Not long after he passed, like 2 months, I had just opened our pub at 4 p.m. and Dean walks in. He didn't look great, but he also didn't look dead. He noticed my facial expression and got slightly pissed as to why I was looking at him in such a way, so I quickly shook it off and served him. Later that evening when my boyfriend arrived, I asked him what was going on with Dean, that he should be 6 feet under. But he said that he had no knowledge about Dean being dead, or that we had had talks about it. I asked them if maybe I confused him with someone else's death, who we all knew and we were talking about, but they denied having knowledge of someone else's death. The funny part is that after this happened, Dean got rid of his addiction, and got his shit together. A glitch which happened earlier, around 2004, where my same-as-above boyfriend and best friend and I went to Berlin for 3 days. We rented a room for 3 in a little lo-fi hotel. So the first evening, it was Friday, we went out and looked for a location to have a good time. Locals guided us to a known party street where usually a lot of people were out, but for some unknown reason, nothing was going on that night at all. Only a few people were there. We still decided to bar hop and have a good time, just us 3. We drank a lot of tequila and water, and after we got kicked out of a bar, only for the reason that the owner disliked our nationality, we left this street and walked up to a kebab where we ate and drank even more, and then decided to head towards our hotel. We did, and the next thing I clearly remember was that we entered a really tiny, cozy bar which was plastered in red velvet and had all dimmed down lights. I think even the carpeting was velvet. We had funny talks with the older locals, men and women, inside, and they were thrilled about our language when we talked to each other. At one point I felt too drunk, and said to my companions that I wanted to go to bed. They felt the same, and we left. I then literally stormed away along this street, thinking our hotel was about 1 kilometer or so away, and I wanted to hurry. But after I went like this for about 20 meters, my companions yelled after me so that I would come back, because our hotel seemed to be right next door to that bar. Really, really next. Like next in the way of the bar door and the hotel door were about 20 centimeters away from each other. We didn't notice the bar when we arrived, and when we left the hotel earlier that day. Well confused, we went in and slept. The next day at noon, when we went out, there was no bar at all next to our hotel. Not even its door. And it didn't show up the following night either. We are still talking about this, and at least this time my friend and former boyfriend seem to remember the same things. I'm a logical person, and I do consider myself a skeptic, even though I know what I saw, and I know that it really happened. Maybe it's just that I tend to be skeptical about most things. I will as briefly as I can describe a little history of the house and the changes my family made to it, because I believe that it applies to what I experienced. I'm originally from a small farming town in Washington State. My parents bought a ranch-style house in this town in the early 1980s, and we lived there until early 1993. The house was built in the mid-1950s, and was known as a party house in the 1970s when my parents were in high school. My parents did a lot of work on the house, as it was a little run down when they bought it. There were many holes punched in the walls and doors. The original hardwood floors were in rough shape, and the family room and original master bedroom had disgusting, torn, brown and lime green shag carpeting. The original master bedroom also had wood paneling on the walls. We tore out all the paneling and replaced the horrifying shag carpets with vinyl and new carpeting and renovated the bathrooms. The main change that my parents did to the house was they added a new master bedroom to the back of the house and converted the old master bedroom to a large laundry room / sewing and crafts room for my mom. The new master bedroom was added onto the other side of the master bedroom from the original master bedroom turned laundry room. I include all of this because during college, I mentioned what happened in this house to a friend of mine who was really into the paranormal, and he suggested that the renovations my parents did, in combination with it being a former party house where there had been drug use and possibly violence, had stirred something up. So one side of the house was set up as follows, from front to back. Family room, the new laundry room, the master bathroom, then the new master bedroom at the back. The kitchen was to the right of the family room if you were facing the door to the laundry room, and could be partially seen from the family room. Now to my experiences. The Void Man. I do not know how old I was when I first saw it, or how old I was when I last saw it. I lived in the house until just before my 8th birthday. I was between 5 and 7. That much I do know. I mostly saw it when I was in the family room. It would stand perfectly still in the doorway from the family room to the laundry room. It seemed to be staring at me, but it had no eyes. It was a pitch-black void in the shape of a human. There were no discernible facial or other body features on it. It was a body with a head on top. The outline of the body appeared to be slightly fuzzy or misty. I would say it was over 6 feet tall. I should also mention that no one who lived in the house was that tall. My mom was maybe 5'3", my dad is 5'7", and my brother was a toddler at this time, so it couldn't be me misremembering any of them. I would just stand there and stare back at it. I felt frozen and didn't know what to do or say. I felt like I couldn't speak if I wanted to when it was there. I remember feeling a sinking sensation when I saw it. I have one distinct memory of staring at it in the doorway to the laundry room, and I could see my mom working in the kitchen. She was standing at the stove and could have seen it if she had turned her head to her right. She did not notice it. I named it the Void Man at some point. Staring at it was like staring into a deep void. A void that would swallow me up. I don't remember feeling fear exactly when I saw the full shadow person. It was more that I couldn't feel anything. That was not the case for the other way that I would see it. It would like to peek its head around the door frames at me. It would do it several times in rapid succession. That would terrify me. I think that was its intention. I would usually go running off to my room, or to go find my mom. I only ever saw the full body of the Void Man from the family room looking into the laundry room, but it would peek its head out at me from both of the laundry room doors. The one leading into the family room, and the one leading into the master bathroom. If my parents ever saw anything, they had never mentioned it, and I have never mentioned it to them. I'm sure that there are those out there that will say, well, you were very young, you must be remembering wrong, or you made it up at some point and then it became real to you over time. I wish this was the case. I really do. But I remember the Void Man very vividly. I know that I saw this thing, whatever it was. We moved out of that house in 1993 and moved into one that we had built. I have never seen anything like what I did in that house ever again, but the experience has followed me my entire life. I have a nervousness about open doors, and what I might see on the other side. This took place mid-July of 2020. I live in the city, but I often drive to my hometown, if you can even call it that. It's a grain elevator in the middle of a cornfield, just to get away from the hustle and bustle and enjoy some peace and quiet. I prefer to go on my hikes alone, sometimes with or without my dog, depending on what animals I'm trying to observe. This time I chose to go alone, so I parked my car at the river just a few miles from the woods that I wanted to walk through. There's something about being able to see everything, illuminated by the moonlight, and hearing the coyotes that makes me feel at peace. I'd finally made it halfway down the dirt road that leads to the woods. I stopped for a moment because I felt a whoosh of really cold air. I thought that was so strange, because it was a muggy Indiana night, around 80 degrees. I stayed there for a moment looking around to see if there was a logical explanation for the draft that I could see with my eyes. But nada. At that point, I looked directly above me and saw 3 baby raccoons trying to sleep on a branch just above my head. I remember thinking to myself, that's kind of odd, aren't raccoons nocturnal? But I just appreciated them for a moment and kept on going. I get another 500 feet down the road and whoosh, another burst of cold air. I stop again to try and figure out how that was happening. There were clear skies, 0 wind. I couldn't think of a good explanation. Before I had much more time to think on it, I heard something. To the right of me was a mostly unkempt hay and grass field, probably about knee-high at most. The moon was so bright that it was impossible to not get a good view of everything. I hear this rustling in the grass, maybe 20 feet away from me, and then it just stopped. I could see the animal now. I'll do my best to describe it. It was on all fours, but it appeared that it had the ability to be bipedal if it chose to be. I could see the nape of its neck, down to where the animal's back legs would be. The hair on its back was very strange. It had a large, thick mohawk ridge along its spine. From what I could see of the animal, I assumed that it had to weigh close to 100 pounds. Its steps were very heavy. Nothing graceful at all about it. The rest of the hair on the animal's body looked similar to that of a chimpanzee or some sort of ape. The 2 front legs were very powerful, had a broadly set stance. But the thing that messed with me the most was the sound. I'll never forget it. I was holding my breath, hoping I had just run across one of the many feral swamp dogs and that he would run off since they don't like people. I realized quickly that I was wrong. As I stood there staring, this animal started sort of loping, pacing into a figure 8 pattern. It did this for maybe 15 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. And then, the thing charged me. That's when it made the sound. There was something so wrong with its breathing. Forgive me if I'm being offensive, that's not my intent. But this animal sounded like someone who was trying to breathe but didn't have a nose, or some serious damage to its airways. It was like a snarl, growl, breath, all in one. I could hear it snap its jaws when it backed away from the bluff. This all happened so fast. Let me try to give more context. About another 500 feet away from where this happened, there's an old-fashioned settler's cabin. My first thought was to get there for safety, but before I could even make that choice, I heard a scream. Not a human scream. I'm not an expert, but through my many years of living in the woods and observing the different animals, I've got an okay ear for knowing what animal calls come from what animal. This scream sounded like a mountain lion. We don't even have those here. So basically I had to say no to that plan for safety. But wait, there's more. If you continue down the dirt road past the abandoned cabin, there's a small parking lot. The reason I didn't take my car there is because you're not supposed to be in that park at night. Well, someone else was there too. After I heard that scream, I heard a car and then started to see the headlights come over the hill toward me by the cabin. At this point, I was flipping out. The crazy animal that charged me was nowhere to be seen. There might be a crazed wildcat just a few feet away, and now some Cutlass Supreme is hauling ass in my direction. In all my wisdom and fantastic decision-making, I dove into the hayfield to hide from the car. Yes, the same field that the crazy animal was in. Thankfully, they didn't see me, but they were absolutely flying, tearing out of that place like a bat out of hell. It made me wonder if they had something to do with the screaming animal, or the weird one in the field. Needless to say, I had had enough of that night, and cut my way through other properties and woods to get back to the river where my car was. I don't usually really believe in most myths and legends and stuff like that, but something I recently witnessed made me doubt myself. I don't know if I'm just being paranoid, but I might have had a very close encounter with something that is definitely not human and scared me out of my mind. Basically, last night I decided to go hang out with a close friend and skateboard around a bit, and I met some other friends from school down by a grocery store there. We decided to hang out for a while and walk around, and they told my friend and I that they needed to start walking home, and that they wanted to show us some apparently cool, sketchy treehouse, where people always go to chill and do drugs and whatnot on the way. We start walking that way, mostly through just suburban neighborhoods, and at that point, it's almost completely dark outside. There were around 7 of us at first, and people mostly started heading out until it was just said friend and I and a girl who had agreed to take us to see the treehouse since it was fairly close to her home. We take this pretty open path to a chain link fence with a hole in it. We go through using our phones as flashlights, and not far after there's another chain link fence with a hole in it, with the treehouse right behind, surrounded by loose bushes and a small forest. We're pretty scared at that point since it's dark, so the friend and the girl stay behind the fence while I go through the hole just outside. After looking at the treehouse for a few seconds, we start hearing rustling in the bushes, but although scared, dismiss it as a small animal or maybe even one of our friends just messing with us since it's pretty close to several houses. Like an idiot, I keep standing outside the small hole in the fence, not moving while the rustling keeps moving around. We called out several times with no response, and the thing, whatever it was, kept shuffling and scuffing around in the bushes a little bit, rustling every few seconds. I tried looking, and could barely see it, but guessed that it was around half my height. It kept on, and after a bit we realized from the footstep patterns that it has begun to walk on 2 legs. This just about does it for us, and we get out of there, looking behind us every couple of seconds. On our way back, said friend told me earlier by the treehouse that he had caught a glimpse of something moving that was a whitish gray color, a bit bigger than a large dog. I visited this treehouse again today with a couple more friends, and actually went up this time. But gladly, we didn't see or hear anything. And yes, I know that I would be the idiot to die in a horror movie. It was in June of 1972 that my mom and dad told me they were taking a couple of our thoroughbred racehorses to Durango, Colorado, where my father owned land, and where we typically boarded some of the animals during the summer. This trip was nothing unusual, as it occurred rather frequently. The only difference this time was that my mother was going with my dad instead of me. I guess Dad figured that at 13, I was old enough and responsible enough to do the morning and evening chores, which consisted of feeding and watering the remaining horses, which numbered about 8. A few cows, 6 pigs, and a coop full of chickens. There were also always a few wounds that needed to be smeared with ointment. These chores were not exactly rocket science, but it did take a while, so I was glad when Lyle offered to come and help me with each evening. He got a kick out of it, as he enjoyed that kind of thing. I, however, leaned more towards the arts, performing magic, singing, playing the piano, and even doing ventriloquism. In fact, I did it professionally by the time I was 12. I had no intention of staying at the house alone while my parents were gone to Colorado. I was very much afraid of the dark, and especially of being alone. It would be years until I discovered why. I was going to spend the weekend with two of my best friends, Lyle and Mark Harper. Lyle was a year older than I was, and Mark was a year younger, so I fit right into the middle of the two. They lived just 3 houses to the west of my house. I can't really call it a house that I lived in. It was one of 4 duplexes that my dad owned. 2 of them were built back in the early 1920s, and the other 2 were newer, as they were built by my dad a couple of years after we moved there in the late 1960s. The 2 old units, A and B, and the 2 new units, C and D, were split down the middle by our long asphalt driveway. The only other building on the property was a very old and very large white stucco garage/shop, which was located behind the units at the end of the driveway. Beyond that old shop was where the corrals and pastures were. With my parents in Colorado, I was in charge of keeping all the animals fed. Darkness was just around the corner, so I took Lyle and we headed to my place. As we entered my driveway, we started walking between the old units and the new units toward the big garage. What made this shop unique were the giant rolling stainless steel doors, one on the left and one on the right, that met in the middle. It created an almost mirror effect, but not quite shiny enough to be an actual mirror. I happened to be looking at the door, noticing how the street light created just enough glow to make our stretched shadows lightly appear on the big metal doors. I commented to Lyle that I wished I was that tall in real life, and that is when it happened. With both of us looking at our very light shadows bouncing to the rhythm of our steps, another shadow, only very dark, no, black, so black that it looked like a thick, inky, one-dimensional entity, ran clumsily across the shiny door from left to right. It was wearing what looked like a wide-brimmed fedora hat. It had a troll-like appearance, all hunched over as though it didn't want to be seen. It scurried quickly in total darkness until it reached the right side of the doors, after which it completely disappeared. We both stopped, frozen in our tracks, trying to comprehend what we had just witnessed. Before either of us could say anything, the thick, dark shadow man trotted back the other direction, once again disappearing as it reached the other side of the doors. Both of our minds instantly realized that nothing solid had run between us and the doors, and that the only way a shadow could be that dark was, well, there was just no way a regular shadow could be that dark. Without uttering a word, we both turned in sync, as though the movement was choreographed, and took off running back onto 8th Avenue. Neither of us stopped until we arrived back at the safety of Lyle's house. Once inside, we ran to his father, Lloyd, who was watching the news on television, and told him that we needed him. We related our experience, and he said that he was sure that there was a logical explanation. I knew, though, that there was not. He walked back to my house with us, and we began to experiment, attempting to recreate a shadow that was as dark as what we had just seen 10 minutes before. It just wasn't possible. Mr. Harper agreed to stay with us while I did my chores in the now dark back pasture area. It would be years later that I would learn about shadow figures and how they operate. Since then, I have been blessed, or cursed, with several paranormal experiences, from full-body apparitions to simply feeling the presence of spirits. I'm not sure why me, but I am grateful. I haven't posted this here before, but I have commented about this incident in other posts. But having recently found this subreddit, I think it definitely fits in here. It was a couple of years ago. I was visiting my parents who still live in the same house that I grew up in. The day I came home, Mum told me that my old school bus driver had passed away the day before. I'd been very fond of him and would often bump into him before I had moved out of that town, as he lived in the same neighborhood as ours. So when Mom told me about his passing away, it was a heart attack, she said, I was quite upset, and I distinctly remember every detail about the conversation that I had with my mom about this. Later that evening, when I was out on a run, I noticed a little blue flyer by the park with his photograph and details of the funeral and a prayer meeting. A couple of days later, I was out buying groceries from the market, when I saw him standing outside a shop, looking very much alive. I was confused AF, and wondered if he had a twin brother. Either way, I didn't stop to chat. Later at home, when I told my mom what happened, she looked really confused and said that she never told me that he had died. I was naturally annoyed and tried to help her recall the conversation and told her about the flyer at the park. She asked me if I was okay, because she was sure as hell that she did not say any such thing about his death. So I go out to walk by the park to see if the flyer is still there, and it wasn't. I was extremely confused by this point, but having no logical explanation to offer, I decided to dismiss it. Not for long, though. A few days later, my holiday had come to an end, and I had returned back to the city where I work. Exactly a day later, I get a call from my mom saying that my bus driver had passed away that morning, and that it had been a heart attack. I couldn't believe it, and I figured that my mom was a bit freaked out too, 'cause she sounded a bit shaky. Not knowing what else to say, I asked her to check if a blue flyer with details of his funeral and prayer meetings was up at the park, whenever she could step out for a walk. Later that evening, she confirmed that there was a blue flyer with those details and his picture. Mom dismissed it as a coincidence and has never spoken of this incident again. Whenever I have tried to remind her, she says she doesn't recall all the details, but I know it's not true, and that she does remember this. It's just so freaky, and I get the chills every time I think about it. I just haven't been able to explain what happened. Say their name, and it will kill them. We live in an isolated community on the Navajo reservation. My aunt and her 2 brothers were home alone, while my grandparents had left for the evening to attend a chapter house meeting. They were in the house, and like many people from the reservation, they didn't have electricity. It had been dark outside for about an hour, and my aunt and uncle were getting ready for bed. Outside, they heard noises, as if someone were moving things around the house. My oldest uncle went to look out the front window and saw a large figure out by the truck. This was immensely out of the ordinary, because the closest neighbor was miles away. Whatever it was opened the truck door and began to dig through the personal items that my family had left in the vehicle. My aunt and uncle were frightened by the sight and knew that they should take action. They took out their rifle and steadied themselves to hold it up. They flung open the door and aimed the gun at the dark figure. The figure turned and began to walk toward them, totally unfazed by the weapon. My uncle pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. The figure drew closer, and my aunt began to smell something like a rotting corpse. It was so strong that it made her gag. My uncle continued to pull the trigger with no luck, and the figure came closer and closer. Off in the distance, headlights were coming up the road. My grandparents were returning. The figure looked toward the lights and started to move away and tucked itself behind a tree near the house. My oldest uncle ran toward the truck with the gun. My grandfather got out of the car and my uncle pointed to the tree. This thing was poking out its head to observe what they were doing. My grandfather ran into the house and over to the stove and grabbed a handful of ashes and rubbed over the gun and placed an ash-covered bullet into the chamber. He walked out onto the porch and fired toward the tree. Whatever that thing was didn't expect the gun to go off. The gunshot echoed, and the dark figure began sprinting. My grandma chased my aunt inside, and my uncle and my grandfather went after it. There weren't many roads or paths, so as my grandfather and uncles chased the figure, the truck was bouncing and the headlights were not fixed on one particular spot. My uncle swears that whenever the headlights would hit the figure, he saw a woman, but not only that. Whoever it was running on all fours like a bear. My grandfather eventually stopped the truck, and as they neared the ditch that drops about 20 feet, he got out and began to yell in Navajo. My uncle says that he was yelling out about a local woman. He yelled that he wasn't scared, and that he knew it was her, and to leave his family alone. A few days passed, and there was news that the woman that my grandfather had yelled about had passed away. I've always been told that if you know who the Skinwalker is, say their name, and it will kill them. Believe it or not, my story is true. My name is Brandy, I am 56, and I live in Washington. All these years, my kids wanted me to write down events that happened to myself and my loved ones. Quite a few members of my family have recently passed away, leaving so many untold stories that I didn't want these experiences to die with me. So for my children, here it goes. A lot of messed up and supernatural things have happened to us in our lifetime, most with witnesses. This is one of them. About 27 years ago, while house hunting for a rental, I met the former renter of this run-down but livable house. She warned me not to live in this house because I have small children. And not only was it run down, it was very haunted, and never, she was stern, never let a man live here with you because he will be taken over by the evil that resides within. Now, I'm thinking she's either crazy or she was just mad at the landlord for something. We needed a home incredibly desperately. I was also thinking that I had lived through worse, and houses could always be cleansed, so I blew it off. I ended up renting the house, but I soon realized that I should have heeded her warning. The house was musty and old, made of wood. The walls, the ceilings, and the floors were all wood. Even the bedroom doors blended in with the walls, but the bedrooms were painted on the other side. There were French doors all along the front of the house going into an enclosed but open-viewed screen porch with a front door. The main living space was long and open. The living and dining area were stretched into one long room, and it was always cold despite having the heater on and it being in the desert. It was located in the high desert of California on the corner of an acre lot of barren desert, and across the street there was a popular grocery store and a few small shops too far away for anyone to hear us. It served as a town hall back in the day, and I think a turkey ranch before that. It was 6 a.m., and we had planned a 3-day trip to the happiest place in the world, Disneyland. My kids, Michael, age 1, Penny, age 4, and Jenny, age 3, were all sleeping on my bed in our bedroom at the other end of the house so I could pack in peace for the trip in the dining room and not wake them. I could see the bedroom door, though, and it was closed. I was standing up folding clothes at the table. My boyfriend's mother, Opal, was sitting across from me when we heard the bedroom door creak open slightly. We both looked up, and it was my daughter Jenny in her little pink and white flowered onesie. I said, "Now you know it's too early, go back to bed." And she replied, "Me up now, Mommy," in her little sweet voice. It made us both chuckle, and I told Opal that I thought she was just excited. I told her no, that we weren't going right now, so please go back to bed. She stomped her foot, which we could feel vibrate through the floorboards. Opal then told me that I had better go and put her back, and I agreed. As I was making that long walk toward her, I was keeping eye contact, and as I was walking, I was telling her, "No, baby," and once again she stomps her foot, smiles, and says louder, "Me up," with the sweetest little smile, and she tilted her head. Opal even muttered, "Aw." It didn't dawn on me at the time how perfect that her little pigtails were. At this point, I'm extending my hands toward her. I get about 6 inches from touching her, and all of a sudden she turned black and disappeared, almost like sand falling to the ground, followed by the door quickly closing behind her. Opal said, "What the hell?" in surprise. Shocked, I stood there with my hands still extended, and then the fear ran through my body like hot and cold needles. My kids were all sleeping behind that door. I grabbed the handle and swung open the door, fearing the worst, only to find my little Jenny fast asleep with her sister's leg over her. Whatever we had seen, it couldn't have been her. Although unsettling, Opal and I didn't talk about what had happened, and later that morning we all piled into the car and went on our trip. We had a great time, but when we came home we were met with all of the lights on and old music playing loudly coming from inside. People were standing around in my living room. 2 separate groups, like 2 different periods of time. I turned to my boyfriend and asked how those people got in and if he left the door unlocked. He told me, "No, why the hell would I do that? You saw me lock it." We all got out of the car and cautiously approached the front door. As I got closer, I could see a couch not where our couch was, with a man in a white tank top sitting there. He was dirty, and he was looking at this boy standing in the corner with such hatred. You could tell the boy was abused by the way that he was standing there with his head down. That's when he looked up at me, and it pierces my soul even now just to think about him. The kids were scared, and the dog was growling. I grabbed the doorknob to put my key in. Just then the music stopped, and the lights went out. We opened the door, and nothing had been moved, and no one was there. I couldn't get the image of that sad-looking little boy out of my mind, and it was a while before I saw him again. It was a nice day. My boyfriend and his mother were still at a doctor's appointment, and the kids and I were out grocery shopping, having a good time. I usually kept the living room light on when I knew that we were going to get home after dark. I didn't realize we would be gone that long, and it was just starting to be dusk. I pulled into the gate, and I think the kids were a little too rambunctious, too much spare change, quarter machine candy, I guess. I sat for a moment, planning my attack with getting all these groceries, a sleeping baby, and the 2 girls up the steps and into the house, when I noticed movement in the living room. No one was home. I could hardly even see anything in there because the light wasn't on. I started to get out when the girls jumped out of the car and started running for the steps. I yelled for them to stop and ran over to them. We could hear noises like a child running around, and my eldest daughter to this day says that she saw a little boy and describes him to a T, but at that moment I thought that it might be an intruder or something like that. 3 steps went up to a landing, a locked front door opening into a windowed screened-in porch, and then the 3 French doors. I told the kids to go to the car, but they were too scared to leave my side. Both of them were clutching the back of my shirt. I armed myself with a huge stick by the landing and forged on. I burst through the front door to the porch, and he was there, his face in his 2 hands cupped against the glass, as if he was peering out, and then he vanished. It was the boy that I had seen standing in the corner before. We went inside and I searched every room with my obviously frightened children practically glued to my side. There was no one there. Was my mind playing tricks on me and I was projecting my fear onto the girls? I turned on all the lights and ran out to get my sleeping baby and the rest of the groceries out of the car when I stopped in my tracks. There on the glass were 2 crescent moon handprints, and it was fogged up where his nose was. It stayed there for at least 20 minutes. Just to add my own thoughts here, I don't feel that we always need words to communicate with spirits, or for them to get a message to us. They are not bound by flesh. It is important that you have an open mind, and always keep your will strong. At night, you could look out the French doors at the stores across the street and see the vast desert behind them. The property was pitch black, so you saw the reflection of yourself and whatever was behind you. That night, everyone was asleep. It was nearly Christmas, so I was admiring the lights decorating the storefronts when I felt one of my children through the floorboards skip up next to me, and then I heard a faint giggle. I felt a tug on my shirt, so I turned my gaze to the reflection, extending my arm over as if to caress the back of his head and pull him in next to me. It didn't occur to me that this was not my child. He came in under my arm and stood there looking up at me, and all I could feel was love and sorrow. I turned to look at him, but he was gone. So I looked back at his reflection, and it was gone as well. He was about 7 or 8 years old. He had what looked like black and white Converse on, and was wearing old jeans with rolled-up cuffs. I could see the edge of a white t-shirt under a light gray sweatshirt, and his hair was sandy blonde and wisped to the side with the sweetest smile. In that moment, I felt everything that he was feeling, and I cried. I saw the images of abuse flash through my head. I don't want to elaborate on that, and he made me feel that the man was not his father, and that he loved the comfort of our presence. There were so many emotions. I went to bed and held my kids tight. I was so full of questions, like what happened to his mom? How did he die? I looked for records and was told that back in the day there were not many records kept out there in the desert. A person could live and die, and no one would know unless it was specifically reported. I felt whatever else was in the house was evil, and we found out just how evil it was the longer that we lived there. I feel I should describe the bedroom so that you can get a feel of the surroundings. On one side of the room there was my full-size bed against the wall, and a single bed next to me against the other wall, separated by a small nightstand with a lamp where my 2 little girls slept. The door to the living room was next to their bed, and at our feet was the hall door and closet. Many nights, we would see the light beneath the door get blocked out, as if someone were walking up to my room just standing there, and then they would fade away. At first we thought it was just Opal going to the bathroom, since it was right next to our room. But we found out later that it wasn't her, because she was frail and had to use a potty chair in her room. The dog would sometimes growl and scratch, but when we opened the door to the hall, no one was ever there. Almost every morning at 6 a.m., we could hear the lid to the toilet slam up and the toilet flush. But when we ran in there, the lid was down and the water was still. A phone would start ringing in my room despite us not even having one, and we would hear old music coming from the walls from time to time. At first we thought that it was coming from the pipes of our neighbor or something like that, but we didn't have any neighbors because the lady had already moved out, and that house was completely empty. So many things happened there, but this night in particular caused me to never let my girls sleep in their own bed alone. The girls were so happy that day. They had both received a package from my mom full of princess stuff. Toys, cups, and bowls, 2 beach towels, and 2 nightgowns embossed with their favorite princess images. The nightgowns were short and silky, and after their bath they begged to wear them to bed, so I happily complied. It was quiet in the house that night. Opal was with family along with my boyfriend, and I don't remember where the dog was, but he wasn't present anyway. I tucked them in, oldest by the wall and youngest closest to me on the outside. I wasn't ready for sleep, so I put a scarf over the lamp to dim the light, so that I could still read. Now I was sitting on my bed next to them, and as I was reading, the covers slightly came down off of the girls. I didn't really think anything of it because my oldest daughter was notorious for kicking off the blankets, so I tucked them both in and continued reading. It happened again, and once again I covered them back up. At this point I was starting to feel uneasy and the hairs on my arms were beginning to raise. Never a good sign. I looked at my oldest daughter and noticed that she hadn't moved. So how was this happening? I sat back down on my bed and pretended to read while intently staring at the covers over the book pages, feeling my heart pound through my chest. Moments passed, and I felt myself trembling, trying to hold the book steady, and then it happened. I saw the covers start to move, but the girls were still. I was confused. I didn't understand what was going on. The covers were then pulled down with force, so I leapt up and grabbed the covers from the end of the bed, pulling them up. At this point, I was standing next to them and my voice quivered as I yelled at whatever was in the room to stay away from my girls. I still don't know who I was yelling at. I sat on the bed next to them, gripping the covers tight, when they were jerked from my hands down to the foot of the bed, exposing my girls' legs. My youngest daughter's nightgown started to rise up to the top of her thigh. She started to scream and grabbed at her leg as if she were feeling pain, waking her sister. I threw my body over both girls and screamed at whatever it was to get out and leave us alone repeatedly. I tried my best to calm the girls down and protect them. We stayed huddled together all night. This was the last time they slept alone in that house. I was able to get a bigger bed, and we all slept together from that point forward. At this point, I'm sure you're wondering, why didn't we just leave? Believe me, I wanted to, but I felt trapped, not just by the house, but also by my boyfriend. Let me start by saying that Bill was not the nicest man. Oh yeah, from the outside he was great. He had a charming voice, and he made people laugh. Nobody thought that he was capable of doing the things that he did. They didn't know him like I did. I feel he tricked me when we first got together. I was young and impressionable. He knew I had low self-esteem, so he made me feel like I wasn't good enough for anyone else and was lucky to have him. We had children together. I knew what he was capable of, and let's just say that I didn't want to lose anyone I loved, so that's why I didn't leave him. But this was different. This was not him. This was an entirely new level of evil. I started noticing a shift in him the longer that we lived in that house. We stopped going out as a family, and he stopped working. He put bars on the windows and one-way locks on all the doors with only one key. Not even his mother cared. She would go into her bedroom and shut the door so that she didn't have to hear me scream or our children cry when he sometimes hit me. And like always, he made me feel like it was my fault. Living there changed him, though. The things he started to do were out of his character, and that made me more uncomfortable. He started watching me from dark rooms and behind cracks in the doors. When I asked him why he was doing this, he got mad and made me feel like I was crazy. When we were alone together in that house, it was even more intense. One such night, the kids were at my mother's, and we had just finished dinner. We were sitting together on the couch watching TV, and I was mending a sock. It had been a pretty good day. I noticed a change in the atmosphere, and for some reason, he seemed to have gotten quiet. I was just about to ask him if he wanted me to change the channel when a small flash of light hit my right eye. It wasn't until shortly after trying to find the source that I realized he was staring at me the whole time through a little piece of broken mirror in his right hand, hidden by the throw cover. My God, those eyes weren't his. I know him. This was not my person sitting next to me, and I was frightened to the core. He didn't even realize that I saw this, so I sprung up. His mom just had a phone installed, so I'm trying to call my mother and check on the kids. He jumped and hid the mirror in the couch cushions and started trying to reason with me as to why I should come back and sit down next to him and not make that phone call. I noticed that while he was talking, he wasn't even looking at me. He was looking behind my head, almost as if he were looking through me. I glanced at my reflection in the glass door, but nothing was behind me. I grabbed the phone and called my mother, assuring him that I was only going to be a minute. We stayed on the phone until he fell asleep, and quite a bit longer. My mother knew what was going on, but she felt helpless, as I did at that time. He got up grumbling something as he walked into the bedroom to go to sleep on the bed, so after we hung up, I stayed awake with the blanket on the couch covering everything but my eyes while listening to him breathe until dawn, when I finally fell asleep. There was another time at around 4 p.m. We needed some groceries for dinner, so I got the girls ready and left my baby boy asleep in his playpen in the living room. Opal was napping at the dining room table, and my Bill was sitting on the edge of our bed in the bedroom. I called out to him that I was leaving, and to keep an ear out for the baby, but he didn't respond, so I repeated myself and I heard him mutter, "Yeah, sure." So we left. The store didn't have something his mother wanted, so I had to go to 2 stores. It had just gotten dark as we pulled up, and I could hear the baby crying. I rushed in, and Bill's mother was still sitting at the table. I picked up my son and he was soaking wet, and it looked like he had been crying for a while. I was changing his diaper, trying to calm him down, and the whole time Opal was getting mad at me for leaving her alone with the baby. I was furious and I told her, "I didn't. I left him with your son." She looked surprised. She didn't even know that he was home. What the hell? Where was he? I put my son down and told the girls to go play. Something wasn't right. I didn't think he was still in the bedroom because the lights were off, but someone was in there. It was abnormally dark. I slowly went up to the door and walked in. There was a dim light coming in through a crack in the blinds, and I saw his silhouette still sitting on the bed. He hadn't moved. His feet were on the floor, and he was slightly hunched forward with his elbows resting on his legs, cupping his hands together. The room smelled stuffy, and the air was thick. I called out his name, but he didn't reply. Once again I called out his name, adding, "You're scaring me." I moved closer, saying, "Why are you not answering me?" I saw that he was sweating and that it was glistening in the light and dripping from his head to his hands and then his hands to the floor. I could hear it as it dripped. I was shaking while I slowly made my way around him to the lamp, and I heard a growl that almost sounded like it was coming up from the floorboards. I turned the lamp on. His shirt was soaking wet. There was a pool of sweat at his feet, and his eyes were darker than I've ever seen them. His stare was fixated downward. I was afraid to get near him, but I felt like he needed my help. I started to shake him while calling out his name. He was cold to the touch. I crouched down in front of him between his legs, but honestly, all I wanted to do was run out of that room. I took his face in my shaking hands and said, "Please, Bill." Just like that, he snapped out of it. He grabbed both of my wrists and hurled me onto the bed behind him. He said in a loud voice, "What are you doing, you freak?" Then he got up and went to the bathroom. I heard him turn on the shower as I laid there curled up, not knowing what had just happened. I soon composed myself and went out to bring in the groceries and make dinner. Later he joined us as if nothing had ever happened, but I still felt uneasy. The night went on, and he was his old self, goofing off with the kids and watching cartoons. I went into the kitchen and started washing dishes with my back to the hall. I heard him in the living room with the kids. I swear, I heard him. The next thing I knew, he was behind me, and he aggressively grabbed my waist and put his mouth on me. I could feel his teeth on my neck. I jumped. He startled me. Then he looked at me like he wanted me dead and said, "You disgust me," and left the house. I don't know where he went. I didn't ask. All I know is that he was gone. He came back later that next morning, dirty, and saying something about him getting lost in the desert. I remember him telling me once that I could scream out there and no one would hear me. We eventually got out of that house after living through horror, not knowing from day to day what was going to happen next, and who was safe from that evil. Later, after his mother had moved into her daughter's house, she passed away. I felt bad because I wasn't even sad about it. I found a way to leave Bill. I made an excuse that I needed to pick up a check from the welfare department and that I had to bring the kids with me. After I got there, I told them that I was being abused, and they helped me find a safe place to go. After I didn't return that day, a detective from the sheriff's department came and asked me questions about him because apparently he stole a child and took her to that empty house. Thank God he was caught before he could do anything to her. I never let him hurt my children, but sadly they remember him hurting me. For years after that, I would have nightmares of him appearing at the foot of my bed, clawing his way up my legs, and closing the space between our faces with his cold breath on my lips, and those eyes. I would wake up gasping for air. About 9 years ago, I looked up his name, and found him on a website exposing predators. I still shiver when I see small mirrors, or broken glass. A few years after we moved out, I ran into the former renter, so I asked her if she knew anything about a little boy ever living there, or did someone die there, and she said, now this is not fact. She said that she heard, I don't know where though, that there was a boy and his mother disappeared, leaving him with his stepdad, who is horribly abusive. Later, the boy was found stuffed in a hole on the property, dead, and they found the stepfather's dried and decayed body on the couch in the living room. He had committed suicide. Like I said, I don't know if that's true, but it seemed pretty damn close to how I felt. I wish even now that I could have helped that sweet little boy move on. We couldn't even drive down that street for years after that, and we all cried with relief many years later when we found out that the house had been demolished to the ground and that a housing tract was being built over the land. I still wonder if those people living there are plagued by the same evil that plagued us. This happened about 15 years ago. I woke up that day feeling really odd, and my very good friend back then called me and said that she woke up also feeling weird, so I told her to come over. We couldn't shake this strange feeling off. Something just felt weird, but we couldn't put a finger on it. We decided to go out in the evening, and when we were walking through Piccadilly Circus in London, something crazy happened. The closest thing that I could compare it to would be that we ended up in this see-through bubble, and everything around us paused for about 3 seconds, and we were, me and her, in sort of slow motion while we were in that bubble. And then snap, and everything went back to normal, but we stood there looking at each other completely and utterly freaked out, as we both experienced the same thing. We just stood there in shock, thinking, what the fuck just happened? We were so shaken by this that we had one drink in the bar and decided to go home. She went to mine as she didn't want to be alone. So we took the train back, and while we were walking to my house, we heard a gunshot. And that bullet passed me by an inch and went into a car that was parked next to us on the side of the road. I literally felt it touch my hair while flying past me. There was a guy in the car who got out and started screaming and panicking as the bullet hit the side door, and we stood there petrified, thinking, what the fuck is happening today? We then ran off and sprinted all the way to my house. The area I used to live in back then is one of the safest areas in London. It was by St. Catherine's Docks by Tower Hill, so whoever is from London can relate. Also, gun crime in the UK is very rare, pretty much below 0. So this whole incident just didn't make any sense. I don't know whether it was related to the slow motion thing earlier and the world pausing, but I couldn't help but think to myself that if I had walked there a second earlier, I would have gotten hit. So I had to shut it off so that I could live a normal life again without seeing them. But my cousin, who has no abilities, has seen them in the house. At first, when he moved in, he didn't know that it was haunted. I didn't want to tell him that the house was haunted because I thought, well, maybe it's not. And if I told him, he would believe it was, and that would influence him in some way. If it was haunted, I was going to let him find out on his own, or if it didn't bother him, then I would let it be. As the weeks passed and things moved in front of our eyes, he started to hear his family members' voices calling his name from time to time in the middle of the night. It was the same experience that I had had. He would have a nightmare sometimes of something trying to come inside of the room, yet it was stuck on the other side of the door, unable to get in. It was beckoning him to let it inside, to open the door. It's odd because I actually have a video of it doing that, and it's heard in the video faintly. When I lived alone, it would occur very frequently, but instead of in dreams, it was literally in real life and happening on camera. I did not show him the video beforehand, so there's no way he could have known. Eventually, I did open up to him about it being haunted, but that it's not really a big deal or anything, since my family ends up in the haunted house usually, for some odd reason. I explained that if we made excuses and such, that the activity would remain low. For instance, if something slides across the floor in front of us, we just pass it off as something else, no matter how stupid that excuse or rationalization is, and we say it out loud, shrug it off, and move on. Sometimes if it happens again after that, we just make another excuse, and then it stops. If something pounds on our walls from all directions, which only usually happens for a few seconds, we just ignore it, and make another excuse, and then life goes on as normal. My cousin would be laying in bed at night, and he explained that he would see this almost rippling kind of apparition. I thought it must be an eyesight issue, so I asked him to show me where it was. Weirdly enough, it was the same wall that I had had a nightmare about months ago involving things trying to climb out of a black tar-like door with nearly 100 arms covered in the tar-like goo. So yeah, it was weird, and he didn't have that experience again. Anyway, in the room one day when I was living there on my own, I had seen a woman, pretty much the generic, typical ghost. Most of them don't seem to look like that in real life, but in movies they do. Just a young woman who floated through my bedroom door and then through the wall beside it. Nearly entirely see-through, and from the waist down, she looked as if she were made of mist or fog. No color at all, and also in a very old, almost wedding gown type of dress. Also in the room, I would often see glowing white, circular orb-like things that would float and then leave. Almost like a flicker, but I thought it was just, I don't know, a headache or whatever. But it was always in one spot of the room. Well, my cousin saw it too, again in the exact same spot that I would usually see it in. And then I told him that it happens sometimes. He's gotten used to the house, and most of the activity stopped happening after I shut it off. I also bought a little spirit box and would use it outside whenever the activity would go up. Soon after I went back inside, life was back to normal and the activity would subside for another month or two. Before the spirit box, the activity was nearly unlivable, dangerous almost. Now it's extremely silent, like we have an actual home now. If anything, it's just a house that happens to be haunted. But a house, nonetheless. With all of the haunted houses my family and I have lived in, my only advice is to never let a haunting consume you. This happened when I was around 10, in a house where the second floor was still under construction. My mom and grandma had a major disagreement back when we were living in Toronto, and my grandma decided to move to her home country, Ecuador. Soon after, due to complications, my mom decided to give in and follow her. We moved in with my grandma, but since the house was a little small for 4 people, and since my great-grandmother was soon to be moving in as well, my family decided to extend a floor. For the meantime, my great-grandma was staying in a room extension with her own bathroom because she would have accidents frequently. The room was an extension outside, close to the main door. My great-grandma was really old, but still cognitive enough to have fun conversations with, so I would spend a lot of time talking with her outside. She started telling me about this little green guy that would visit her at night, and he would just sit on the TV and watch her. In South America, we grew up talking about duendes, leprechauns that would mess with people wandering around strange areas at night. It's kind of our folklore, like the chupacabras or skinwalkers. But since my grandma was getting old, my mom would just brush it off and blame it on her aging or her mental health. One night my family went to a dinner party, but since I had a best friend over, I insisted on staying home. It was getting really late, but we were waiting for one of our favorite shows to air on Cartoon Network. My family is very religious and hated these quote-unquote demonic cartoons, so we tried to watch quietly. I was under the impression that my great-grandma was resting in one of the rooms behind us, in my mom's room, because I kept hearing noises coming from down the hall. Suddenly, I hear my grandma's walker clicking its way out of the room, so I quickly turned off the TV and told my friend to be quiet. We hid under the blankets and waited until my grandma went back to the room. She used to walk with one of those 4-legged walkers, and would take her time as she moved. We thought she was just going to use the washroom, so we decided to wait it out. Her walking seemed very quiet, though, which was odd, but I didn't think much of it. She went to the washroom, but didn't open up the toilet lid. There was no noise, no peeing or anything. And the weirdest part? No word or call to see if we were sleeping or still up. We just heard the walking go straight back to the room quietly. Then suddenly I remembered that the dinner my family went to was meant to celebrate her. She wasn't home, and we were supposed to be alone. As soon as I realized that, we heard small footsteps sprinting from one room to the other, and then a glass breaking. We were petrified. We didn't know what was behind us, if it was someone that broke in or an animal, but we were too afraid to look. We stayed under the sheets until my family came back home. Fortunately, they arrived only moments after. As soon as my stepdad came in, we told him what happened. He brought my dog upstairs where the second floor was being built, as he was thinking that it would have been an animal that came in since the staircase was only being covered by a plastic sheet. My mom goes into my grandma's room and finds a glass jug on the floor with a broken handle. The jug was supposed to be in my room. Something had to have carried the jug and dropped it in there. My dog was also barking throughout the night, which was pretty common, but when he came in the house, he seemed really anxious to sprint upstairs, as if he knew something was there. My best friend and I have been through a couple of weird things back home, but nothing as vivid as this. Again, it could have been an animal, but that doesn't explain the metal walker noise that we heard. It could have been an intruder, but we would have definitely seen someone come through the plastic covering the stairwell. It could have been the little green guy my great-grandma talked about. A lot of times little shadows would rush through my peripherals, but I always thought it was just my imagination. She passed away only a couple months after this. But weird small footsteps and random dog chases never stopped. The footsteps I would hear didn't sound like small critters, since animals tend to bolt from place to place. The steps I remember hearing as a kid seemed much more meticulous and slow, and always late at night. I was around 12 years old, and me and my friend were in the mountains. I can't recall the name of the village, but it was situated in the Czech Republic. We were on a hike and stumbled upon an old military station or bunker, just left there after World War II. We went home for flashlights and came back just before the sun was out. We went inside and found that it had like 2 or 3 floors underground, maybe more, with a 40-meter well full of frozen water on the ground floor. We decided to go down and explore. First floor, there was nothing unusual, just some empty concrete spaces. We went another floor down, and I saw some things on the ground that looked like dead rats from a distance. I laughed it off and went to take a closer look. They were bats, about 10 of them, just lying down, dead. They weren't like violently smashed or anything. There was no blood. It was as if they were just sleeping, not even rotten or decaying. I poked one with my foot, and the thing just rolled over. I started to get a little scared, but eager to explore further. My friend was basically halfway up the stairs at this point, nervous laughing, saying, "Yeah, we should really go, I have a bad feeling," or something like that. I was almost pulled to continue exploring. Half of me knew that it didn't feel right, but I ignored my friend and continued on. I was almost there, and I suddenly got sick in my gut. That feeling that's screaming in you, the adrenaline. I took another couple of stairs, shining with my flashlight ahead, and then I saw it. I scanned the whole floor, seeing the stairs that went even further below collapsed, so no getting further down. And as I looked across the room with my flashlight, there was a spot that it could not illuminate. In the middle of that spot, there stood the shadow of a man. The flashlight's beam just couldn't get through the form of it. It ate all of the light. I then realized how cold that it had become. I could see my breath. I was staring, paralyzed, for what seems like minutes, but was probably only a couple of seconds. The shadow got a little closer as I blinked. No need to say, I bolted like I never did before, not even caring if it was behind me or what it was. Just running for my life. I got to the entrance and my friend was looking at me horrified, and I just told him to run while rushing past him. We sprinted for about 5 minutes, then confirmed that yes, we were still alive. When we got home, he told me that he had seen something in the corner as I ran past him, so it wasn't just me. His father told us the next day that a lot of soldiers had died there, and there's even an army museum nearby. So was it the ghost of a soldier or a shadow person? It was late summer, and my mom and I had decided that we should go out for a little spontaneous hike. We did our research, and found one trail that said it was a 4-mile round trip. Sounded easy enough. We got up early that morning, and began our trek. The entire forest had a horrible vibe. Even my mom picked up on it, and she's never been into any of the paranormal, etc. We had been walking around for hours, and this forest just seemed to get weirder and weirder. We had plenty of water and food, so I really can't say if we were just dehydrated or tired. We began to hear singing in the woods, and we just stopped and stared at each other. We had to be miles into the forest by now. Our step counter was saying that we had well surpassed the promised 4 miles. Where on earth would singing be coming from out there? We just looked at each other and began laughing. I remember her saying, "No way," and shaking her head and carrying on. It had been quite some time now, and we hadn't encountered another person on the trail. Suddenly, this man walking really fast surpasses us and rounds a bend behind a rocky hill so that we can't see him anymore. He said no words, just came up behind us and darted by. Again, me and my mom laughed and envied his athleticism until we rounded the bend ourselves to find that he was completely gone, out of sight. The path after that bend was fairly straight, and you can see far ahead of you, so there's absolutely no way he would have been able to clear that area that fast. This time my mom stops and says, "You gotta be kidding me." We're thoroughly freaked out after this. Eventually, we reach the peak, and after walking that long, you'd think that someone would probably want to stay there for a while and enjoy the view. Well, we pretty much got to the top, looked, and then left. We never discussed it, but I could tell that we were both uncomfortable and just wanted to leave. We were maybe halfway back through the trail, and the sun was beginning to set. We were moving fast. Our step counter said that we had hiked 10 miles compared to the 4 that we had initially expected. As the forest got darker, I began to hear leaves crunching behind us. I reluctantly turned and noticed that it was a buck several yards away. We hurried along as to not disturb it further, but then I began noticing that something was off. It was following us from a distance. It did so almost like a predator, hiding and peeking. I tell my mom that we were being followed by the deer, and we were pretty much at a jog at that point. The buck would not let us go. I would sometimes notice that it would catch up and follow just beside us. It always remained several yards away, though, always lurking, head down. I've lived out in the country my entire life, and have seen all the deer that you can imagine. I've never been followed by one like this. This seemed more than just curiosity. It felt horrible, predatory. I felt like I was in danger, always hearing those footsteps behind me, the feeling of being watched. Clearly, we made it out unharmed, but I really wonder if it actually intended to hurt us, or if it was just ushering us out of the forest. All in all, it was a freaky experience. Something is definitely up with those woods. About 30 seconds ago, I was sitting on the couch as my dog walked by to go sit on our bed we have behind the L part of this section. She had something small caught in her throat last night, I think a popcorn shell, so I was paying attention to her breathing just to make sure that she got it out. For a few minutes, she was breathing fine, and then what sounded like a light snore started happening. This is semi-normal for her depending on what position she's laying in, so I didn't bother to go over and check. That went on for about 5 minutes, until the most disgusting, and to my now realization terrifying, snore, cough, wheezing sound started happening. I go over to her to make sure she's okay, and the exact moment I looked at her bed, the sound stopped, mid-breath, and she wasn't there. She was outside with my parents. Had been for around 30 minutes. There's no way to get out of the room without walking right past me. I don't know whose fucking dog I saw, or what was making that creepy-ass sound 5 feet away from me. But I'm going to be staying outside for the rest of the day, and hiring an exorcist. This is a story that happened to me when I was just a fresh graduate, starting my first job at a temp agency. It was 2002, and my job was located in the middle of nowhere and very far from my home. Therefore, I took the effort of doing most of my job in the office till late at night, since I do not wish to come home and continue with work. Rather, that would give me some rest for the remainder of the night. I usually stayed up even later on Fridays, knowing that if I finished the work fully, the weekends would be golden for me. So, this story occurred on one of those Fridays when everyone else had already left. After making my prayers for the night, I continued with my work. There was no one, I believe, that was in the office, but I felt a presence. Perhaps it was another coworker working late just like me. I took that belief to heart. At one point in time, around 11 I believe, I needed to go to the toilet, which was located at the end of a long, dark hallway, lighted only by the green exit sign. I found that the toilet was locked, so I looked to the toilet that is on the next level. I took the staircase, which was lighted by a circular wall lamp, and found that the toilet was unlocked. Thankfully, I did my business and returned back to work. The next part of the story comes in a rather weird way. As I made my way back, passing by the locked toilet, I saw the shadow of someone by the office door beaming from the front light that I had left on. My guess is that either the coworker was about to leave or that she was taking coffee for the night since the pantry is near the entrance. When I got there was no one by the pantry or the entrance, so again I went back to my desk. I was trying to finish up that last bit of work when I started to peek through the gap between each desk, trying to see the other person who was working late at night, but somehow, no matter what, I was unable to spot him or her. When I got finished up about 15 minutes later, I decided to get myself a drink from the pantry. Then, the lights went off. Just as I took the can of juice from the fridge, I turned to find myself in total darkness. There was a voice calling out to me, trying to reach me, and I tried to find it. The voice was unclear at the beginning, but soon it became what I think the person was saying, "Help me." The sound was the strongest by the window which was facing the main road that was now deserted. I looked about in the darkness, seeing if there was anyone in distress, and as I did so, I felt a hand touching my shoulder. I turned around, and no one was there. At this point already, I knew that I needed to get the hell out, and so I went to my desk and started packing. Then it came. It came from outside, falling with a piercing scream and with a clear face. The face of a bloody woman. I quickly rushed to the window, opened it up, and looked at the ground, but there was no one. I made my way to the ground floor and to the main road, clutching my laptop and backpack as I tried to search for a cab, but it felt like nearly hours, despite it only being minutes before one came by. What kept me at the edge was the fact that I felt like 1,000 boots were marching toward me, shouting in Japanese commands. I kept my eyes on the road, but occasionally I turned back to see my office building. On the last turn, I saw a bunch of uniformed men with rifles, gray faces bayoneting a bloody woman, stepping on her body, throwing what I believed to be her baby in the air and killing it as it landed on the ground. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran from the scene. One early summer morning in 2000, I got up and ready to drive my mom to her job at a local retirement home. It was dark starting out, but the sun was gradually coming up. I dropped her off and started returning to her house. Halfway back, driving on a country road densely populated with trees and houses, I noticed a car coming because I could see its high beaming lights from a short distance. I also saw a large, jet black dog in my path, standing completely still with its head pointed forward. It had a slender build. Having only a few seconds to think, I decided to continue forward and brace for the impact from running into its body. I closed my eyes as I got the closest to it, and continued to drive without swerving, and to my surprise, I felt nothing. I slowed down to check for the dog, but there was absolutely nothing back there. As I continued my drive, I felt strange because there was no way that I would have missed that animal. It was not facing me. It was facing right. I would have struck it broadside. Anyway, I'm thankful I didn't swerve. I feel like had I swerved, things would have been very much different for me today. I do believe that I could have died. Once a year, my parents go on a vacation together somewhere in the U.S., usually to the Bahamas or to Florida. They leave me in charge of the house with my dog and like for me to check on my Nana, who lives in our basement. My dad likes to take part in this weird golfing competition with his friends, where if someone wins a certain amount of holes, they get to take home this creepy doll as sort of a trophy. I don't get why, but I guess it's just some running gag. Well, my dad won the competition, and he brought it home before he left. I'm not at all scared of dolls. In fact, before he left, I slept with it beside me as a joke. It was basically an old baby doll with a missing eye and a brown dress. I don't know the origin of it, and didn't really bother to ask. November rolls around and my parents leave for their vacation. Everything goes normal for a while, but then things start to get weird. Because I'm the stereotypical little brother, I put the doll on my sister's bed, who's in university, and took a picture to send her as a joke. She hates dolls. So I leave the room with the doll still in there and head to my room just to send the photo and move on with my life. A few minutes later, I hear a massive bang. I jump, startled, and go to look out into the hallway. My sister's bedroom door has slammed shut. Now, our hallway has no opening windows, and there wasn't any sort of draft. Even if there was, that bang sounded forceful. A little on edge, I open her door and see that the doll has fallen face forward, even though I left it sitting upright. I thought it was weird, but brought the doll back into my room and moved on. That night, I'm sleeping normally in my parents' bedroom. I have to sleep in there while my parents are away because I need to keep an eye on my dog, and she refuses to sleep anywhere else. I wake up suddenly in the night, which is odd. I usually sleep all the way through the night. I check the time and see that it's around 3 a.m. This immediately scares me because I read that it's the witching hour. I glanced over at my dog, and she was awake too, with her head up. Also strange. I put on my little puppy voice and ask my dog if she needs to pee, but she just stares back at me, then looks to the closet. I look to the closet too, and see that it's open even though I remember shutting it before going to bed. I quickly turn the lamp on and get out of bed to close the door. I don't even bother looking inside. My teenage brain still thinks a ghost is more likely than an intruder. So I get back into bed, scroll on my phone a bit, until I fall back to sleep. I wake up the next morning as usual to feed my dog, but when I go out into the hall, I see my bedroom door is open. I always close my door when I'm not in there. Now, it was still dark out because I have to feed my dog around 6 a.m. or she throws a fit. I look inside my room, turn on the light, and the doll is on the floor. I left it on my bed. I remembered last night and am now feeling paranoid, but again, I just put the doll back on my bed and leave, deciding just to have my door open. After feeding my dog, I went back to bed to sleep a couple extra hours. That's when the most frightening thing happened. I was woken up by a loud banging sound, loud enough to wake me up, the heaviest sleeper in my family. I quickly got up and ran downstairs, my first thought being maybe my Nana had fallen in the basement and was banging for me to help her, but when I got downstairs I realized that the banging was coming from my balcony door. I saw the glass shaking, as if something was hitting it from outside. The banging was so loud that it was shaking the counters. The strangest part is that my dog was just standing in front of the door staring at it, and she's the type of dog who will start barking if a mouse farts. I'm really shaken up at this point. It's completely still outside, no wind at all. I text my parents and tell them what's going on. As soon as I do, the banging stops. They tell me it's probably nothing to worry about. I went downstairs to see my Nana, but she had no idea what happened. She's also completely deaf, so of course she couldn't hear it. She can't even walk up the stairs, so there's no way she caused any of it. That was the last weird incident that happened. The next week, my parents got back. I didn't tell them everything that happened because I didn't want them to think I'm a chicken or something. Needless to say, I moved the doll out of my room until my dad brought it back to his golf team. Nothing else strange occurred. I still have no idea what went on during those couple of days. I sort of wonder about the story behind that doll now. but I don't really know if I want to ask my dad. About 5 years ago, I had just moved into a new house with my wife at the time. We had 2 kids, ages 2.5 and 1. My 2.5-year-old was very articulate for his age, and so one day as we were walking out the front door, he points across the house and asks, "Mommy, who's that little girl right there?" Well, my wife and I just kind of froze, because he was the kind of kid that had never made up any imaginary friends, or anything like that. But the moment passed, and we kind of forgot about it. Around 6 to 8 months later, I remember I was in my bedroom late at night. I have a large window in my bedroom that looks out into my backyard. I also had a couple strings of lights overhead that illuminated the yard perfectly. One night I was up studying for a class the next day when I looked outside and saw that my kid's swing set had one swing going back and forth in a perfect pendulum motion like someone was on it, while the swing next to it was dead still. This was not the first time this has happened. It was actually the third, I think. But it was the instance that I remember the most clearly and took the most notice. I honestly have no idea why I didn't think to tell my wife or to take a video, but I just stood there in the window and watched it for a couple minutes, and it kept up perfect consistency. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out to my deck to get a better look. Still swinging. I had been studying lots of science classes at that point, so my head was in the space of, I'm going to figure out the rational explanation of why this is happening. It was breezy out, so I walked up to the swing set and held my hand in different places around the swinging swing, and no breeze. Plus, again, the swing next to it was dead still. Also, my thought was that if it was the wind, there was no way that it could keep a perfect back and forth motion. If a swing gets even a little off, it would have collided with the one next to it. Anyway, I'm not sure if I had a previous encounter with my son in mind or not, but I had a very certain feeling at that moment that there was a little girl swinging on the swing. Almost like I could see her, but obviously couldn't. I also felt very at ease and not frightened at all. Then after about 5 to 10 minutes, I stopped the swing just to see what would happen, and it remained stopped. I remembered apologizing out loud to the girl for stopping the swing, and told her that she could swing whenever she wanted to, but it never happened again after that, and I haven't had any additional encounters at this house since. I looked up public records and asked the landlord if there was ever any little girl that had died in this house, and nothing. The only info that I could collect is that a few years before we moved in, there was an elderly woman who lived here for about 20 years, but the owner had the landlord kick her out in fear that she would die on the property, so she had to move in with family a few states away. Anyways, I would love to hear your thoughts on this one. So I've been sitting on this story for 3 years, telling some close friends who respond with astonished looks and advise on mental health, and think I'm completely insane. It's 11:17 in rural New Brunswick, Canada, and I'm getting in my car to head back to Fredericton from my parents' place in the middle of nowhere. I had just finished up a small gig at a local fair, having had 1 or 2 beers at the show. I'm just pulling out of my parents' driveway onto a dim country road going back to the city when I turn on my high beams to see a tall, lanky, completely black figure standing in the ditch on the right side of the road. I mean, this thing must have been 8 or 9 feet tall. It absorbed all light and had limbs no bigger around than a baguette. As soon as I saw it, it started to run up the ditch and across the road in a very fast, very strange, gliding kind of way. I slammed on the brakes and watched this thing run across the road and into a field on the other side of the road towards some woods. I'm getting goosebumps writing this, but I could still see its silhouette speeding across the field in my neighbor's yard as it went into the black of the night. I stopped for a moment, shivering, before speeding up the road to a safe distance. I had no idea what I had just seen, so I called my mom to tell her that I had just witnessed this tall, alien-looking creature less than 100 meters from our home. She and my sister searched online with what I had told them, and came back with an article on the black stickman phenomena, which fit exactly what I had seen on this normal August night in New Brunswick. This experience has really opened my mind to the paranormal, so for that I'm almost thankful. I was looking over my shoulder for a few weeks, afraid to go out at night, and I still feel unnerved when thinking about it. I haven't seen anything like it since, but have had some experiences with spirits growing up in what my whole family agrees is a haunted house. This last Halloween, I didn't have many friends. Only 2 at the time who wanted to celebrate together. One eventually bailed, leaving me and my friend Rob to hang out alone. It was freezing, and I had to bike out to our usual rendezvous place, which was about equidistance from our houses. This place was a gas station adjacent to a very large field that was occasionally used for soccer games. Once we both arrived to the gas station, we went inside, got water and sunflower seeds, and left. Due to the pandemic, we decided not to risk exposure by trick-or-treating, so we went to go walk in this field. It was around 9:30 at night, and pitch black outside. We don't live near any major cities, so our only light was from the moon and the stars. The sky was clear that night, so around 5 minutes in, we became entranced by the stars in the sky, walking forward with our heads craned back, looking up. This went on for a minute or two before we thought we heard shuffling near us. We turned to the right to see a dark figure, lit very dimly by the extraterrestrial light. I'm a rather small person, and Rob isn't too much bigger, so the littlest things normally will put us on edge. But this thing was different. It looked bipedal, though it seemed to be bent over with a near hunched back. And there were protrusions from its head, either horns or ears. It was difficult to tell. I immediately emitted a short scream and ran to the side toward Rob. I knew he occasionally carried a hunting knife, as he's more of an outback type of person than me. The thing then bent down to walk on all fours and started yipping strangely, like a small dog almost. My friend grabbed the back of my jacket and yanked me back and yelled at me to run. He then pulled out the hunting knife. The creature was pacing while still making strange noises. It looked like it was about to get closer before Rob threw the knife at the thing and got up to run. He yelled an exasperated "shit" as he started to sprint away. As we ran, I heard a voice repeatedly echo Rob's, also saying "shit." We ran all the way back to the gas station and to where we parked our bikes. Wordlessly, we decided it was best to just go inside the brightly lit station and just wait for our nerves to calm down. We haven't been able to hang out since due to the virus, but I doubt that we will go walking in that field at night again. One of my best friends and I really don't know how we ended up in each other's lives. And no, I don't mean in a cutesy, "where did I find you?" type of way. I mean that neither of us remember how we got to where we are in our relationship. We met as teens through mutual friends, but were never more than friendly acquaintances at most. Next thing I know, 10 years later, I'm involved in her wedding. She's a bridesmaid at mine. We're at each other's houses multiple times each week, and I even visited her and her daughter in hospital hours after she gave birth. We are super involved in each other's lives, which isn't unusual for close girlfriends. The problem is that there are big, serious details missing. It's like there's a 2 to 3 year gap where lots of important stuff happened that we just don't remember at all. I don't remember meeting her husband, or buying her house. I don't remember the first time I was in said house. And I don't remember her physically changing, despite the fact that she lost a lot of weight and became very involved in working on her appearance. She doesn't remember showing me her house either, or me being anything other than what I am to her now. We just don't know how we got here. It doesn't seem all that important or mind-blowing, but it really unsettles me when I think about it or when we chat about it. It's like there's something to it that I can't quite put my finger on. We also always joke that we are polar opposites, but there might be something to that. At one time, somewhere between our two weddings, I was extremely torn about our relationship. I found her to be so extremely abrasive as a person, but didn't once question the relationship. It's like I just accepted it because she was my best friend. I don't know quite how to explain how it felt. But aside from this, our differences are of the severity that, at the age we were during this gap, we are sure that we would have gotten in the way of us ever being close friends. Was she replaced? Was I replaced? Are my previous memories false? I just don't know. Full disclosure, I have had issues with depression and anxiety in the past, which have their own effects on memory. However, this wasn't affecting me during that part of my life, and I don't have anything similar with any other part of my life. Also, it doesn't explain how we're both on the same page with this. It's 12:44 a.m., and 10 minutes ago, I saw a ghost. I live in the basement, which is almost finished, so it isn't the creepy, empty stages anymore. It's really comfortable and homey. Today, though, my parents are putting up a new wall separating my room from the laundry room, so that's the change. It's a little uncomfortable tonight, and I do admit that having such an open space where I could see and not see everything is a little spooky, but I wasn't actively thinking about it, and I was actually really relaxed and just scrolling through TikTok on my phone. This is the setup. I have my bed in the middle of the room. My TV is adjacent from me, on, playing Family Guy. I'm facing left, which is facing the laundry room, and the almost built wall. There's a small landing that goes to my sister's room, which is also in the basement. The back storage room, which the light was on, and then the stairs that go up. My fan, which is also to my left, is on. I can't hear a whole lot besides the fan, my phone, and the TV. My phone is positioned almost directly in front of my face, but with what I saw, it was not in my peripheral. It was directly next to my phone screen, so I clearly saw it. A half-white figure walked past from the landing into the laundry room. I could only see the bottom half of it. It was clearly opaque white. I thought it was my dog at first, so I sat up and called her name a few times, but she didn't come. Then I thought maybe it was my parents and they just couldn't hear me, but I didn't see the laundry room light turn on, or the washing machine or anything turn on. So I turned on my flashlight and called my dog's name again, thinking that she might be getting into something. When she still didn't come to me, I got up with my flashlight still on and turned the bedroom light on. Then I checked everything out to see if it was my dog, and if she was just being silly, or maybe even if it was a cat. Nothing was there, so I got freaked out and went to my sister's room, which her light was on, and the storage room light was on. My sister wasn't in her room, she was in the garage. So I told her what had happened, and she thinks my mind is probably just playing tricks on me since there's changes going on downstairs, and it's a little scary down there right now. Which, I admit, it is, but I was really comfortable, and about to go to sleep. I have been in those instances where I freak myself out, like watching a scary movie or something, and I convince myself that I heard or saw something, but of course nothing happened, and I sleep fine. But tonight it was different. I just know it. As soon as I figured out that it wasn't my dog or my parents or any cats, I began to feel nauseous and my heart started pounding. Now, this isn't the first time a paranormal experience has happened in this house. It's just the first time in a while. Recently, my grandmother passed away upstairs in what's now my parents' bedroom. My grandfather also passed away in this house in the hallway going to the garage. Every paranormal experience we've had, we know that it was one of my grandparents, since it was never malvoyant and we never felt nervous or scared. I'm not saying the spirit I saw was malvoyant. I do believe that it was my grandma, but it still did freak me out, and I did cry. It's only been a month and a half without her, so it's nice to know she's still around. But it was awful timing, Grandma. I'm now sleeping upstairs until my parents finish the wall. Good spirit or not, it's still nerve-wracking to have a paranormal experience. I was around 7 years old when this encounter happened. I was visiting my aunt and uncle's old house for dinner and a movie at their place. They reside in this town about 1 hour west of the city that I live in. It was around 10 p.m. and the sun had set. Darkness permeated the outdoors. I remember laying down on the couch watching a film, but I was half asleep. Before I intended on sleeping, I felt the urge to go urinate, so I made my way to the hallway leading to the bathroom. This is when things started to get weird. The hallway in the house has 2 doors on the left-hand side, and 2 doors on the right-hand side, followed by the bathroom door, which is straight ahead. The first door on the left was for storage, the second being my aunt and uncle's bedroom. The first door on the right led to the basement, and the second to the guest room. Before I made my way to the bathroom, I had the urge to look inside my aunt and uncle's bedroom, and I was in complete shock at what I saw. There was the silhouette of a slender figure dressed in what appeared to be an all-black dress suit, although it could have been anything, as this figure was darker than the darkness surrounding it. The thing was nearly 7 feet tall, but was not wearing a hat, and I couldn't make out any facial features. There was no way it could have been my family members, as they were all in the living room still watching the movie. As I was standing there in silence, the figure barely budged, and I just went on to do my business. As I left the bathroom, I looked back to see if this figure was there, and sure enough, it was gone. I bolted down the hallway and plowed my face into the pillows in fear. When my family asked why I ran into the couch like that, I mentioned that it was because I saw a ghost or something. They didn't think much of it at the time, thinking that kids, just have their imaginations. But I know what I saw. Some weird shit happened to me about a year ago, and I haven't shared it with anyone because I'm afraid they'll think I'm crazy or not believe me. Anyway, at a family gathering at my grandma's house, my mom and I decided to go get some KFC for the family around noonish or so. Once we pulled up to the drive-thru, we waited for a little bit, and nobody was talking to us through the speaker thing. So after waiting, we decided to just pull up to the window. We noticed no one was there, so we thought, okay, fuck it, let's go inside. As we walk up, we see the whole restaurant looks closed, and the doors were locked. Lights are all off, and it's empty. No customers, no employees. There was even a row of high chairs that were put up on the counter, like when a restaurant is closed. We basically said fuck it again, and decided to go get pizza. About 20 to 30 minutes on our drive home from getting the pizza, we pass the same KFC, and my mom sees that it has cars in the drive-thru. My grandma was expecting chicken, so we stopped to get some chicken. Here's where it gets really fucking weird. We walk inside in order, then ask the lady why they opened so late. She gave us a confused look and said they've been open since 10 a.m. As I looked around, there were families who looked like they'd been sitting there for a while, eating and chilling. I was so weirded out, I actually asked a family how long they were there for. They were nice people and told me for about an hour. My mom and I have never said anything to anyone because we still don't know what the fuck happened. I even thought maybe the employees were late, so the cashier tried pulling one on me, but the family made me reconsider that. I don't know. Weird AF. And wondering if anything similar has ever happened to anyone. Recently I moved into a new house. Two close friends, let's call them E and R, moved in along with me. When we went to view the house, nothing seemed off about it. However, about a week in, we screwed up. E had been cleaning out the attic and came across a wooden box. It looked fairly new and we didn't think anything could ever go wrong with it. E and I looked inside the box. All that was there was 4 candles, an old matchbox with no matches, and a small wooden doll. E and I set it aside, not interested. We ended up putting it back in the attic, apart from the doll, which R wanted to put in her potted plant. We proceeded with our sorting and forgot all about the box. That night, when I went to bed, I felt as if I were being watched. It was unnerving, but I eventually fell asleep. A few hours later, I heard something bang against the floor above me. I would have brushed it off as E, as his room was up there, if what had happened next didn't take place. For a bit of background knowledge, in September of 2017, R was in a car crash. The others were fine, but R ended up in a wheelchair. R called out for me. It wasn't calm as it usually was, but frantic. I moved into her room, and she asked me if I had heard the crash. I told her I had, and thought that it was just E. She looked me dead in the eye, and told me that E was working a night shift. It was unlike her to be so flustered, so I offered to stay with her, which she accepted. Soon after, we began to hear light footsteps and giggles outside R's room. We were scared, but continued to try and tune it out. R fell asleep, but I stayed with her, scared shitless by possible ghost children. Eventually, the stupid undead kids stopped running up and down the halls, so I assumed they left. I was then able to fall into a well-deserved slumber. Then, maybe an hour or so later, E got back from work. I know this because he is incapable of entering anywhere quietly. And then he screamed, like a grown man screaming as if he were a little girl. He ran up the stairs into my room, and then out of my room because I was with R, and then he ran into R's room. He then told us what had happened. Apparently, he'd been putting his work bag down, and felt as if he were being watched. He looked up, and for a split second saw a little boy and girl holding hands. Now, normally I wouldn't have believed anything like this, but E is an honest bloke, and I saw the look of terror on his face. I live in-house of an animal shelter as I'm the on-site vet and do most of the dog's medical needs. We're a non-profit organization, so the majority of our money comes from adoptions, but we are also located out in the middle of the desert with about 20 acres, give or take a couple of acres. I started working here last month, and I have had so many strange occurrences during my nighttime walkthroughs. Living on site means that I room and board here, and typically you get rats and squirrels, small vermin who will poop and agitate the animals. But last night, I was walking around with my flashlight, and one of the dogs who is very calm and chill, his name is Gizmo. He sort of protects me as I've had a raccoon attack last week and had to get a couple shots and some stitching. He comes with me for protection as he's a guard dog of sorts. He's a pit bull terrier. I was counting our dogs and double-checking everyone had gotten their meds, and the cages were locked. I got to the back where trucks can pull in and go out onto the open lot and see what I assumed was a very large dog. I thought that it was one of our big dogs that got out of his pen, so I approached it. But Gizmo started growling and whimpering and pulling back. I flashed my light, and the dog was hunched over still. I pulled Gizmo and he wouldn't budge. I walk over to the kennel where I thought the dog had escaped, but the fuzzball was in his pen. I flash the light in the direction of the dog again, thinking that it's a stray, and see it standing on its hind legs. I don't think anything of it, but that it's a big dog, and that it'll tear Gizmo to pieces, so I release him from my waist leash, and he takes off back to the gate, and sits there whimpering and barking still. I turn to look back at the dog, or thing, and keep my light shining, and get my phone out and have 911 ready to dial. That thing stood tall on its two hind legs, and honestly, I was probably stupid to go closer. I got closer, but it started running away on its two hind legs, and it just sent chills down my spine. Gizmo came back to me and started pulling me away. As I closed and locked the fence, I felt like it was out there again, and so I walked back quick to my room and let Gizmo sleep with me. My boss told me it's my mind playing tricks, but I didn't tell her Gizmo saw and felt the presence as well. As an 8-year-old child, I was given a porcelain doll by a very dear family friend, Miss Marion. She was all the time coming across things and giving them to me. This doll was the last thing she gave me. I was never really into dolls at all growing up, but I took the doll and placed her in my room in a small, child-sized rocking chair. The chair sat right next to my closet and dresser beside my nightlight. The doll was very pretty. She was dressed in a peach and cream colored dress with an apron and petticoats. She had little black Mary Jane shoes that, when removed, showed her delicately painted toenails. Her body was soft, only her head, forearms, and legs from the knee down were porcelain. Her lips were pink, and her dark brown hair hung in slightly frizzed and now loose curls. Her eyes were brown, her cheeks a rosy peach color, all like mine. Miss Marion had a point of saying that the doll reminded her of me, which is why she gave her to me. From the moment that doll came into my house, things began to happen. I was always uneasy with Claire. I never wanted to touch her, and when I played in my room, it felt as if she were watching me. It wasn't anything to panic about, but I do remember feeling like if I did something wrong, she might actually tell on me. How ridiculous does that sound? The first real occurrence I remember was when I was reading in my room. Ghost stories, if you can believe that. When a musical carousel horse that sat on my dresser began to play. Not just a couple of notes, like old mechanical music boxes will do at times, but like someone just wound it up fully. I sat stunned and stared at the little horse as it moved up and down in time with the music, and then it just stopped. Not wound down, just suddenly stopped. I was a pretty brave kid. I didn't run, and I didn't tell my mom. I just let it go. The next thing that happened was the voice. For several nights, and on into these years, I was woken up by what sounded like a woman inches from my face shouting my name. I would jump and sit up and find my room empty. Those happenings died down after a few months. She then started to plague my little brother with the same thing, and now that he and I are grown and gone, she's moved on to my dad. The little things started to get to me. I'd put something in a certain place only to find it later on the floor or on my dresser, right next to Claire. All my missing items eventually turned up around her. Once a ring ended up in the pocket of her apron. Books would fall off of my shelves, and a perfume smell would sometimes fill my room. The doll itself didn't smell at all, but the air around her would. My catalyst to finally get Claire out of my room was the night I woke up after hearing thumping around near my closet. I opened my eyes, sat up in bed, and of course my eyes were drawn to the nightlight where Claire sat. As I watched, the source of the thumping became clear. The rocking chair Claire occupied was rocking on its own. I had thick shag carpet, so there's no way it was rocking just by chance. If that wasn't enough, Claire's feet, which were both turned to the side facing opposite each other, slowly straightened themselves to be both pointing directly up. This part still freaks me out 20 years later. She then turned her head, which was quite impossible to do since it was fixed to her cloth body. She looked toward me, and every music box in my room, 4 of them, started to play at once. I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't feel endangered so much as I just felt scared of what was happening. I screamed for my mom and dad. The music stopped, but Claire maintained her gaze in my direction. And this is why I hate dolls. Even after that, I couldn't get rid of Claire totally. I ended up stuffing her in a box in the back of a storage closet. She's still there as far as I know. So is the woman who now screams my dad's name in the middle of the night, and not in the kinky way. While I think she explains some of the oddities that happened in my parents' house, I don't think she's the tie to it all. Last year, I was living in a small mountain town in central southern Colorado in the Rio Grande National Forest. Super small town. Ute natives were tragically killed in the whole area. I don't usually get creepy vibes when I'm there, but it's definitely weird in many ways. I was in my car at 2 a.m. with a friend. We were parked outside our house looking down the road with the only streetlight across the street lighting up the area. From 15 yards in front of us, we see a large animal emerge from darkness and catch the light. We started asking each other what it was, commenting on its size. It was like the size of a small horse or a big deer. It walked toward us. It stood 1 yard away from my door. We were frozen. We were unable to move, and we just stared at it with it so close to us, and I said, "Is that a wolf?" It's all I could think that it could be. It was tall, completely silver. It looked like a wolf from a movie. As it stood there, it looked up to the sky, and then left, and then to the right. Then it ran away toward the large cliffs at the back of the town where the abandoned mines are, and a large forest begins. We were stunned. We stayed frozen and silent for minutes until we just started laughing. We eventually calmed down and went inside, but were confused as hell. After that, I told some coworkers, thinking how cool it was, that I saw a wolf. They all said that it was impossible, that no wolves had lived there for decades. So I do some research, and they're right. No wolves have been here for like 40 years, and it would be a miracle if I had seen one, especially a gray wolf. As I look at more pictures of wolves, my memory becomes clearer. What I saw was too tall and silver to even be a gray wolf. My friend and I have not forgotten one detail of this story. I'm sure it wasn't a dog. If it was, then that was the biggest dog in existence. I remember the world washing away as I stared at its shining fur. It was possibly the most majestic animal I have ever seen. There were chills covering my body. and I could barely breathe. Do you think that I saw a skinwalker? This past weekend, my boyfriend came over and we were hanging out downstairs. I soon got tired, so I ended up going upstairs to my bedroom. I immediately felt a presence following me as I walked up the stairs. It felt as if it were following behind me, and there was something breathing on my neck. The feeling when you know that something is there. Me being scared, I refused to look back. I just plop into bed and face the wall, hoping that nothing happens. I still feel like there's something there, but this time it feels like someone is just watching me sleep. Then it starts to get hot. Even though I was scared, I turned to open the window, and there is a holographic type of ghost hovering over my bed. I turn around again, not getting up. I lay there facing my wall, so uncomfortable for a minute or two. I quickly get the courage to open the window and go lay back in bed. But before I get there, my LED TV starts flashing and changing the color mode. Mind, these lights only turn on when the TV is on because they're connected to my TV's USB, and I was unable to turn them on myself when the TV was off. I quickly grabbed the remote and turned it off. Then, all of a sudden, the empty Starbucks cup sitting on my nightstand table falls off in a weird way, as in it looks as if it were being pushed. I turned on my bedroom light, grabbed my phone, and yeeted out of there. I was so terrified. A few years ago, me and a buddy from the army decided to meet and catch up. We decided on the date and place. After several hours at the local pub, it was 3 a.m., we had 3 beers each and decided to go pay our respects to a friend of ours who had died a few years ago and was with us in the army. We bought a bottle of our friend's favorite booze and drove toward the graveyard. When we got there and started to walk toward the gate, we both saw someone standing there. As we got closer, I could definitely recognize the very friend that we were going to visit. He was standing there in his uniform holding a rifle and was waving at us to come closer. I was incredibly freaked out by what I was seeing. I just turned to my friend and looked at him and asked him if he was seeing the same thing. He was so shocked that he couldn't even talk and was just nodding his head with his mouth open. We backed away slowly and went back to the car and drove away as fast as we could from there. Where I'm from, they say never go close if you see the dead calling you over. But ever since that day, I keep hearing someone call my name behind me when I'm all alone. At first I thought it was my wife messing with me, but that's not possible, because it's a male voice. Once again, I'm really freaking out. A few times I left my phone recording on all night to prove to my wife that I'm not going insane. But every time I do it, there's zero evidence. Just static and me and my wife snoring in the background. For years, I've dealt with the disappearing object phenomenon, but lately, items have started appearing or reappearing as well. Just this morning, for example, I woke up and went into my kitchen to make coffee, and a random pack of paper coffee cups was sitting in the middle of my kitchen counter. No one else lives here or has access to my house, and I always set an alarm at night, so I would hear it if someone had tried to get in. I literally have no clue where this pack of coffee cups came from. It just appeared out of thin air. I'm grateful in a way, because it sure was convenient to have the cups this morning, but still, who put them there? I even checked my Amazon history to see if somehow I bought these without remembering, but no such purchase was there. I've had other objects randomly appear in my bathroom too. lip glosses that aren't in a color that I would normally buy. I've had strange food items that I didn't buy appear in my pantry too. Boxed soups, ketchup, I don't even like it. Mustard, don't use it that much. And a random bottle of soy sauce. I don't even know what to think about this. As a kid growing up, I dealt with anger problems and would always let my emotions get the best of me, so my mom would always send me off to these residential programs. However, they weren't all that bad. If you did good, you could go on these what they called passes. It's when if you do good, you can come home for X amount of hours. So I was doing good and already had been on a few of these passes, and I got to come home for 48 hours. It was Halloween and me, my mom, my sister, and a couple of friends got together and went to this haunted house. So when we arrived, there's a line of people who are waiting to enter, and I had to take a leak really bad because I had sat in the car for hours waiting to get there. I walked to the side of the building, and there's nothing but woods literally growing next to the building, like there were tree branches leaning against and on the structure. So, as I was taking this long leak, I heard something step on a couple of sticks, and I noticed a dark shadow figure on all fours creeping up toward me. It looked kind of like a human on all fours, but this was definitely not a human. Like I said earlier, I've dealt with a lot of problems during my childhood. I didn't even have a childhood, so I was very different from a lot of people in so many ways. I didn't have a big reaction to it. I just kind of watched it and made sure that I wasn't seeing things. I tried to keep an eye on it and called my friends over to where I was to get a look. They were caught up in a conversation though and weren't paying attention, so I tried to run over to get them and get their attention and then run back to make sure this thing was still there. By the time I got them and ran over to the area, there was nothing. This thing had disappeared without a trace. I couldn't even explain to them what just happened. They didn't pay much attention to me after that. A couple of weeks went by and I just forgot about it and let it be. This happened to me 2 years in a row when I was young. Too young to face as much horror as I did. I was 6, and it was Halloween. I was just getting into bed when I heard an awful screeching sound coming from the hall closet. It was right by my mom and dad's bedroom, but they didn't hear a thing, which really freaked me out. I slowly got up out of bed and ran silently to the closet. I opened the door, and it took all my effort not to scream. I saw a yellow metal box. I opened it and saw the creepiest doll. It was a raggedy, ugly, old doll. Its hair was in 2 long, blonde braids. Her, I should say. I slowly picked the doll up. It screamed again. And this time I did too. From that night on, the thought of it lurked in my mind until the next Halloween, when I had another encounter with it. When everything happened again that year, I made up my mind and threw it away. The next day I had gone into the closet to get my hula hoop, and my eye caught the yellow box. I picked it up. I opened it, and an uncomfortable chill ran down my back. The doll had returned. I couldn't get rid of her, ever. To this day, I still know its exact location. I'm from Norway, and I'm fortunate to travel a lot. During my travels, I've seen the same dad and son on 3 different occasions, 3 different continents, in 3 different decades. And they looked exactly the same each time. So the first time I saw them was in New York, back in 1999. I took an escalator in a mall near Times Square. I was going down, they were going up. All three of us stared at each other until I reached the bottom, and they, the top. Fast forward to 2009. I'm in Rome with my family, and in a new mall, new escalator. I see them again. They look exactly the same, and I realized that I had seen them before. And we do the same thing. Stare until I reach the bottom, and they, the top. Fast forward again, this time to Dubai in 2019. I'm at the Dubai Mall, and you guessed it. There they are. This time it looked like they recognized me too. They just stared at me different, like they didn't want me to see them. They both looked very serious and almost angry. This time I felt super uncomfortable because I immediately recognized them. And this is 20 years after I saw them the first time, which raises a few questions. First of all, why do I keep seeing them in the exact same situation? Why don't they age? Is it just a coincidence? Why always on the escalator? And why do they stare at me until I'm out of sight? The weird thing is that in the malls I've seen them in, you usually walk around for a few hours, but I've never seen them anywhere else besides the escalator. Also, the sun looks to be around 14 or 15. That's why it's so easy to see that they hadn't aged a bit. Kid was still 14 or 15, 20 years later. One night when I was about 16, I walked outside onto my front porch after an argument with my mom and her husband. After about an hour of pacing and talking myself out of just leaving, the sun was setting, so I turned back and started heading back toward the house. When down the hill, about 150 yards, I see something slowly walking out of the tree line that looks to be a young woman in a dress, but the setting sun is shining off of whatever she's wearing. I don't think it's normal, and I'm a little freaked out, so I run inside and grab my binoculars. I come back, and she's only moved a few feet, walking very slowly, long steps. I focus in, and she's glowing. Gold. And she's dressed like a nun. Again, she was glowing gold. I've never seen her since, and I've spent the last 12 years searching for answers of what I witnessed that day. This happened a couple years ago on a friend's property. His property line comes up to a heavily wooded area where strange stuff is heard at night. We were hanging out in a small shed out back. I had just introduced one of my childhood friends to this guy, and we were hanging out when we hear his pit bulls going crazy, barking and growling at the woods. Then, an extremely loud, high-pitched shrieking comes from the woods, which made my childhood friend jump. As soon as the shriek was heard, his pit bulls came running in, one of them hiding under my chair. A minute or two later, we see 3 sets of very large, opalescent eyes staring into the shed. We started hearing small, light shrieks as they moved closer to us. I could just barely make out a completely white, gray, bony form before my buddy tells us to cover our ears. As soon as I cover my ears, he pulls out an old revolver and fires 3 shots out the open door, chasing these things off. I looked over at my childhood friend, who just looks like he had a heart attack. My buddy puts the gun on the small table and tells me to take him home, which I gladly did. I've been back over there a few times, and every now and then I hear a shriek coming from the woods, accompanied by my buddy pulling back the hammer of his gun. This just happened today, and it still got me freaked out. I was sitting watching TV when movement in the kitchen caught my eye, and I looked up to see my husband, who'd been taking a nap in the bedroom, standing in the kitchen doorway, watching me. He was wearing his MASH PJs. I looked at him and said, "You okay?" He didn't answer me, and just kept staring. I turned to put the remote on mute and pause, so I could see if he was okay since he just stood there silently staring at me. It took me about 2 seconds to do that, but when I looked up, my husband was gone. The kitchen was silent, so I got up and went into the bathroom thinking he went in there. The bathroom was dark and empty, so I turned into our bedroom to see if he was in there getting dressed. I about crapped my pants when I saw him, still laying across the bed, sound asleep, in his jeans and Realtree t-shirt. It dawned on me then that who I saw in the kitchen hadn't been my husband, even though it looked like him, and was wearing PJs that my husband actually owns, but wasn't currently wearing at that time. I can't figure out what happened, or why, or how I saw what I did. If you guys can figure it out, or have a good guess, please let me know, because I'm still unnerved. It was creepy. This story took place when I was a kid. My dad has been a pool man for many years. One of his oldest customers decided to purchase a ranch. I don't exactly remember where. He asked my dad if he could come and fix their pool, which was disastrously maintained before he bought it. He gave my dad permission to bring us along, and told us that we were welcome to stay a few days to enjoy the ranch. We drove there, and I had been in charge of reading the MapQuest instructions because I never seemed to be able to sleep during car trips. We drove back home a few days later, after my dad was finally able to save the pool. The drive home was very long. For endless stretches, the view was mostly desert, farms, and the occasional small suburban town. Unlike me, my mom and brothers were knocked out almost immediately. So, most of the trip, it was just my dad and I talking or listening to music. I'm also a very avid reader, so I had a book on my lap beside the maps. I remember the ride had been quiet for a while, because I had been reading. I had to stop because it was getting dark, and my dad would only let me turn on the dome lights to read the maps. No radio service, and the Game Boy batteries had all died. All I had left to do was stare out the window. All of a sudden, I spotted a very tall shadow on a roof. I realized that there was a man who seemed to be wearing a hat, bowler or top hat, dancing and jumping from rooftop to rooftop of this suburban lot. It was kind of like the scene from Singing in the Rain, which, at that point, I had not yet seen myself. It took a second for me to realize that this was not a normal thing to observe. The houses were separated in a way where a normal person couldn't possibly have jumped from roof to roof the way that thing was. What scared me the most is how at the last house before a field he seemed to turn around and sense me. He bowed and tipped his hat. Even though I couldn't see it, I could also sense that he was smiling. All I felt was dread. I turned to my dad to see if he had also seen it, but he had of course been paying attention to the road. When I looked back, I couldn't see the houses anymore. They were way behind us. I never saw a face or any details. He was just a silhouette on the roofs. I remember the feeling of being afraid that it would follow us. That it could, if it wanted to. I never saw something like that on our many road trips ever again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it, but it felt so real. The memory is so vivid as well, which always comes back when I'm watching old musicals because the dancing reminds me of the way that he moved. So last year I received a doll from my aunt. It was a hand-me-down that she found in storage, so I don't know its origin story. Her name is Alice. First weird note is that I immediately knew her name as soon as I held her for the first time. Anyways, originally Alice sat in my room, but one day while cleaning I put her in my closet. After putting her in my closet, weird stuff started happening. I would hear her in there, usually her knocking against the walls. It was so loud that my friend could usually hear it over the phone. I would get reoccurring dreams of someone named the Medicine Girl. I would often awake from these dreams in sleep paralysis. Other objects and items would go missing randomly, only to be found in places where I had not left them. My grandmother's stuffed bear, that's at least 50 years old, would move across the room and end up in places that I also hadn't left it in. I practiced witchcraft, and the plants on my altar died. All of this stopped when I moved her out of the closet and back into my room. Due to all of this, I believe that she is haunted. However, I can't find anything online about what you're supposed to do with a haunted doll, and I'd like some advice. I believe she is scared of being alone, or doesn't like being hidden, hence everything stopped when I removed her from the closet. There's a ghost inside of mine and my girlfriend's new home. We've heard stomping in the kitchen in the middle of the night, among lots of other things. The issue that I have is that I wonder why it never shows itself or does anything in my presence. I've come home to doors open, and the animals in the corner shaking. Or I'll hear things in the other room falling, and sure enough, there will be something on the floor, but it never does anything while I'm in the room. My girlfriend, however, has seen the ghost, has had it open doors that she was next to, and heard it whisper. Is my energy off-putting to the ghost, or does my girlfriend attract it through her fear? I do not fear the ghost, and view it as more of an annoyance than anything, whereas she is terrified of it. Back in 2018, I decided to move out to another state. My friend's mom said that she had seen me a few times on our street at 4 a.m. while she was driving to work. I came back in 2019 and stayed for a couple of weeks and then left to a different state. A couple of nights after I had left, my friend says that she was getting out of her friend's car to head to the front door when she sees me heading to the front door with my 2 red suitcases and the guitar case that I had. She said that once she got out, I turned around and went across the street, going in front of the headlights, where she got a good look at me. I was wearing the same clothes that I had left in, had the same suitcases, and the same guitar case. They say it's a Skinwalker, which would make sense because the entire area we live in were Indian burial sites. The area has always been supercharged with energy, but from my understanding, Skinwalkers imitate animals? I'm not sure what it was. Definitely wasn't a ghost, because I'm still alive. But now I'm back here with my friend at the same house, and I would really like to know what could be impersonating me. It's been about 8 months since this incident. I still remember it clearly. It was around 10 o'clock in the morning. My mom was in the bathroom taking a bath, so we can say that I was the only person in the house with my dog. I was feeling thirsty, so I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and my dog followed. When I turned around after drinking the water, I saw a shadow figure. It was completely opaque, pitch dark, and had a full humanoid form. It ran from the gallery in the room that was parallel to me. At that moment, my dog started barking wildly and ran into the same room. I had a pug, and we all know pugs don't usually bark that much, but at that moment he was barking too much. I froze, wondering what to do, and when I came back to my senses I sprinted, took my dog, and locked myself into a room. Even after locking ourselves in, my dog was still growling. When my mother came out, we checked the whole house, but we couldn't find anyone. 2 months after that incident, my dog died. I work in procurement for a large corporation. I meet with a lot of salespeople. In the industry in my area, people move around to different companies a lot. A familiar person came in. I had done a significant amount of business with him at the onset of my career 10 years ago. I said, "Hi Steve, it's been a while. When did you leave Acme?" He looked confused and said, "I never worked for them." I let it die, and everyone chalked it up as mistaken identity. The problem is that I immediately recognized him. We had spent a lot of time together on a project. His voice and mannerisms were very familiar. I was kind of spooked. Later, I tried to locate my former associate, and I cannot. So I always struggled with sleep paralysis, but one time, maybe 3 years ago, I woke up from my sleep, but I wasn't able to move at all. I saw a very slim, abnormally tall, black figure in the corner of my room. I looked at him. He was looking at me, his face down. When I looked at him, he just calmly walked away from my room, and I woke up. To this day, I still think about it. And I found out thousands of people all around the world see the exact same thing. I can't believe it's all psychological. How can everyone see the same thing? From China to Ireland, USA to Turkey? It doesn't make sense. I think that we all may have witnessed something otherworldly. This happened to me a few months ago. I woke up in the middle of the night. I was on my back, and there was a man standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me. He was wearing black. He looked very calm. I think he was floating because he was high up in the air. I have always been freaked out about ghosts, but for some reason I did not panic, and I just stared back at him for a few seconds. After he seemed to realize that I was awake, he was surprised and appeared nervous. He then turned away as if he was leaving and disappeared. I never had any experiences with sleep paralysis, so I don't think that this was the reason that this happened. Also, my dog was sleeping next to me, and she did not wake up. Even after he left,